There we go. We're recording. Okay, everything is good. Okay, so here's what I wrote here. This can be, as we explore goals, this can be an interesting example of something that can happen and how something that gets absorbed at a young age can then have a ripple effect and a ripple effect and a ripple effect. It also is going to give us a sense of how our brain can do things by default and so forth. I wrote here at the top something that we often learn some form of this, right, when we're young, and it makes so much sense that we generally retain it, right? So if you say to someone, if you hurt somebody, that is bad, right? That seems like it makes all the sense in the world. And of course, I'm not here, of course, telling you to hurt people, that something's wrong with that. But let's take a look at then what happens. Because more goes on. Our brain doesn't do logic like we might expect. And what it tends to do is automatically encode the sentence below this does not logically follow from the top one. It's the inverse. With the inverse, you put a not. This top statement is an if-then statement, right? If you hurt somebody, I could have written then, that is bad, right? So if P, then Q, or whatever. It's a conditional. Conditionals are great to understand. We use them all the time. If we tell someone, if you hurt someone, somebody that is bad, what the mind will tend to do, and this is an example of something the mind does with our goals constantly, is we set a goal like an if-then, and your mind will kind of often, or maybe close to always, as far as I understand. When I'm talking about your brain, we don't know this for absolute certain. This is more like observational, but it's pretty consistent and pretty overwhelming. And you can just look at this for yourself. Your brain will make it so it seems to follow that it's also true. And again, this is actually a fallacy. It's called the fallacy of the inverse. We might have heard the phrase fallacy of the inverse, but the issue we're dealing with, or one of the many issues we're dealing with our brain and our mind, is that we don't realize, we're way overconfident about how well it works. And we don't realize the predictable things it's going to do by default that are going to be wrong. So we might hear that phrase, fallacy of the inverse, without realizing that it's messing up our goals like every day. And it's also creating all sorts of little avoidance things and triggers. And people ask me about motivation sometimes. And one of the things that's going on is our mind is just cluttered with all sorts of goals that happen. Last time we talked about you make a goal and then your mind will make these sub-goals for feedback, right? And that can be very counterproductive, as I illustrated. So this whole cascade of things can happen when you think there's just one goal going on or one innocent seeming statement like this. And there can be a whole ripple effect in your mind. So it will also tend to encode and feel like it must be true. If you don't hurt somebody, then that is not bad. So what we can see happening in just our daily lives and in society is that if we're violated by somebody, then it's like we have to explain how we're hurt. And we'll actually feel like we need to feel bad about that incident. It's not like we think it through clearly and logically. It's just that we'll tend to like if somebody wrongs us, then we often kind of go through in our mind and might have a discussion with somebody else. And we'll have this sense like it's not just that we are hurt, but we actually have a goal to be hurt. Right? And I'm showing you this example. The example itself should be interesting and helpful, but I'm also showing to you to open your eyes about all the kind of treasure we can find as we explore into the methods and strategy and the model that I have. And as we start to see how this type of thing happens, we can start to unravel these issues that are in our mind, that are invisible, that are messing with us all the time and causing clutter, causing counterproductive, maladaptive thinking, and we don't even know what's going on, right? So someone might wrong us in some way, and it might be a lot more adaptive in whatever case to let it go, for example. But then it's like we feel like, well, we're supposed to feel bad because somebody hurt us. And if we don't feel bad, then they didn't hurt us. And we want them to understand that they hurt us. And we also don't want other people to violate us. And so if I'm talking to someone else or I'm talking to that person, then I'll feel like I need, and when I say I mean in this kind of default case, we'll feel like we need to express how hurt we are. And then we have this goal, this idea that we should feel bad about the thing, and we'll maintain it. And so if I or someone were to come along and say, hey, I can show you how not to feel bad about this violation that this person did or is even ongoing, someone would often reply to me, no, I like, or either they'll reply or they'll feel it'll block them, that they actually think that they have like a goal to feel bad. And you see, it comes from this statement, if you hurt someone, that is bad, and then the accidental inverse that gets in people's mind. And now we can see this in society as a whole, right? With the power of being offended, right, or the power of being a victim, and so forth. I'll feel it if I'm talking about taxes, like somehow I have to be hurt or express that I'm hurt, or else people will feel like nothing bad happened. But and so that's not, as an example. And so people, and the another interesting thing that happens is that if there is no harm, like the idea of no harm, no foul, right? That might be okay as a rule in basketball or something, but the idea that we can just what we do is we miss the mark here. This is blurry. It doesn't capture all the bads related to violations. There could be other types of bad in the world, but it doesn't capture all the kind of property violations because it doesn't identify the real issue, which is violating property. And also it can cause problems, like if you're a doctor, right? And if you feel, or not even feel, like if deep in your psyche or your brain that you don't even realize hurting someone is bad, then you have this kind of approach avoidance, right? Approach avoidance is a continuous problem that we'll face when trying to achieve our goals. For sure, when we're trying to make money, there's all sorts of ways, right, when it comes to rejection potentially, or feelings like we're not so smart if we're trying to learn a task or accomplish a task, right? All this approach avoidance. And this is an example of that, how that type of thing can happen. This fallacy of the inverse causes these kind of inverted goals to happen a lot in your mind. Just hearing me say this, or just being aware of the fallacy of the inverse, is not going to erase those goals. But what it can do is to help you to, when it comes up for you, when you start to notice, you can let go of the additional. You remember I talked about the defense against the defense. Now there's something kind of metaphorical or parallel where people could drop certain things that make them feel bad, and little triggers, and things that make you feel bad, that affects goals. When if being rejected makes you feel bad, or if someone violated you, or you feel like maybe especially because we can be hurt by something that isn't even necessarily an actual violation. We could just feel like it was. Another thing that can happen is someone might not do what we want, and we might have been counting on that, right? Had an expectation, like I'll talk about on another slide here. And so it can come up all the time that we come up with something that if someone else did, someone that we're working with, right, or a romantic partner or whatever, we think, okay, if they did this, or maybe they said they would do it, but maybe there wasn't really much of a contract there, you know. Maybe there was, but maybe there wasn't. And so it would be a pretty gray area, thinking, do they really violate your property there? And then especially if it's just something that we hope that they would do it because it would be better, then we can feel hurt if they don't do it, right? Now we're hurt, and then when we feel hurt, what our mind is going to do is it's going to look for what's unique in the environment. It's going to tend to look for a person, first of all, in most of our cases. And so it generally isn't going to introspect too much and think about how that came from our own mind, right? So it's quite easy to with any kind of, it'll kind of hunt around for a justification for blaming someone else, basically, right, our mind. And then so even if even if objectively speaking the person didn't really hurt you, it's easier for our mind to come up with that that conclusion. Now it's like, oh, this person hurt me by not doing what I wanted, and now they're bad because, and you don't really think it through much. There's just all kind of impulses and associations that our brain is calculating, right? I want to talk also today a bit more about how we're not our brain. And that lets us kind of disassociate from it in a different way and think about it differently without protecting it so much and so forth. And just overall, we can't have a good model of the mind and how we interact with it without understanding that it's not us. But as I go through this example, this can show you how all this can happen in your mind. So something as innocent and common and as innocuous and even correct sounding as if you hurt somebody that is bad can get blurred and generalized and miscoded, right? Miscoded with the inverse. Plus, our mind can look for someone to blame, decide that someone else hurt us, even if they didn't violate our property. Then that person must be bad, right? And then that leads to problems. It is much harder to influence somebody if you're thinking that they're bad. And it doesn't have to be every day, all day, every day. But if every week a thought pops into your head that somebody that you're trying to deal with in business, or a client, or a colleague, or a romantic partner, or a friend, if it pops in your head once a week that that person's bad, then it's going to seriously be maladaptive for you. It's going to seriously impede your ability to influence them. Because if you're thinking that they're bad, then there's a separation there, right? You're judging them. They're like more of an other. There's several reasons why it's maladaptive, but one of them is that you're going to be feeling like they're more of like a them, and like on the out group, right? You're going to feel more separated from them. That's going to come across subtly or clearly to that person. Then they're going to feel that same way about you. And one of the biggest things about influencing other people is getting to be on the same side, right, in their perception. And if you don't perceive that you and them are on the same side, then you're going to communicate that idea one way or the other. Even if you're also communicating that you are on the same side, even if you just say the words, we're on the same side, even if you feel like you're on the same side sometimes, but you can be conflicted, right, because your brain can have all sorts of different conflicting ideas zipping around in there, or dormant and then get triggered, and so forth. One of the reasons, see, I have a method to my, I don't know if we think it's madness at this point, maybe sometimes, but I have a complex weave, not because I want it to be, but I have reasons for things that might go beyond what might be obvious. When I talk about property rights, it is much more profound than it might seem, because it's a way out of this whole cascade that I'm going to continue to go through. When you understand the world in terms of property, and that the only real bad morality has to do with violating someone's property, and then you can investigate that idea more, but now you're on the right track, you have the right foundation. The reason why it's foundational is if the opposite, and the topic of how to know what's true is something I'll deal with specifically, but I'll keep indicating it and keep giving examples. The opposite of individual property rights would be the idea that there's, so the opposite of the idea that people own some property of some sort, right? We can investigate what that might be, right? Roughly speaking, they're, most of what has to do with their body, their money and other resources that they earn, right, or are given, and their reputation, right, is also something in terms of being like misrepresented and so forth. But anyway, that can be investigated, but all we have to do is look at the phrase, which I don't have written down here, but it's easy to grasp. We own some property, whatever that might be, right? And the opposite of that is we own no property, none. And once you can boil something down like that, it becomes pretty clear that the idea that people would own no property at all, that would mean we can do anything we want to someone else's body, right? How could they object? I guess they could say, well, we're not supposed to hurt somebody else, right? But that doesn't work. Is it okay to take half of someone's money, or I don't know, do whatever to them, but it doesn't hurt them? And it's also just a vague thing. What hurts them? What if you do something that doesn't hurt somebody now, but then it triggers something that's going to screw them up later, right, in a year, right? What does hurt mean? You get into that. Anyhow, but anyway, it's probably very clear and obvious and distinct that the idea that people own no property whatsoever, that we can do anything we want to someone else's body, anything we want to their money, their property, say anything we want about their reputation, right? Spread lies and rumors so people don't all dislike them, everyone turns against them, no one buys anything for them, and so forth. Then that's ridiculous, clearly ridiculous. So it must be that some people own some property. And if we build from there, then again we have something that is ends up being very distinct. And that matters so much because another thing that's going on is enculturation. I'm skipping down a little bit here, and I'll go back up. But as you're trying to do your work and as you're trying to make money and so forth, then usually kind of the main two things I'm especially look at is our relationship, especially having a romantic relationship, and that making money, right? If we have those things covered and if we're generally not creating our own problems, then we're in great shape. But of course, there's other stuff in the world too, other stuff in life. But regarding making money, for example, as you're trying to get your body and mind to devote resources to pursue goals towards making money, then there's so many little enculturated ideas of what's good and bad that are in your mind that actually serve as goals that are kind of dormant unless they're triggered. But something as simple as like your family, there might be an idea like I don't even mean like your spouse, because at least there's a contract where you have some sense of something where you should spend some time with them and so forth. But suppose your parents or whatever, or think that we do this all the time. We put this kind of moral sense to things like, oh, we need to go out to dinner tonight, right? It's someone's birthday or it's an anniversary. We have to go out to dinner. You could decide to go out to dinner or not. But if it's just embedded in your mind like you're kind of bad if you don't do that sort of thing, then what's the reason, again, why property rights matter so much is because morality has gotten so sprawling in your mind starting when you're at a young age. And there's just all these zillions of little enculturated things, how we're supposed to dress, do this and that. Of course, we need to be aware of what's going to cause other people to react really badly to us. And we can make cost-benefit decisions based on that, right? Dress in a certain way and dress in the first place, right? When we go out and act in a certain way, go out to dinner with people, like I said, like on their anniversary or something like that. But you want to start letting go of the morality of it, right? This idea that you morally, it's just a way of manipulating us. And getting us to do what people want without them realizing it. It's so common and ingrained, right? It didn't start with your family and the culture that you were enculturated with, right? That or those people that directly did it, right? They got it from someone else and they got it from someone else, right? And so it regresses out to the beginning of humanity or whenever various cultures popped up. And then not only is there a culture at large, but there's your individual family, which matters in terms of what ideas got in your head. And so if you don't have a kind of clear and simple and decluttered idea of morality, then you have all these goals that are cluttered in your mind that can get triggered all the time. People can make you feel guilty or ashamed or just get you to waste time all the time. Plus, we'll pick up these norms and standards, right, from the people around us, and one of them is that these ideas we're talking about in alchemy are not that, it must not be that important, right? Because they're not usually thought about. Like thinking about goals and the goalscape. I have a cool word for you, the goalscape, that I want to show you to focus on rather than how we tend to focus by default. Okay, let me kind of go over this slide a bit here and then I'll move along. Okay, so it starts with if you hurt somebody, that is bad, right? This is kind of blurry. You get the inverse in there. That inverse, which does not logically follow, then we'll tend to reach the conclusion, right? We all feel this. We've all been through this, right? I've mostly, or to large part, gotten rid of it, but just by figuring it out and kind of dealing with it kind of pervasively. But I certainly figured it out because where do I get all this stuff? From my own mind, right? Where do I get all these mistakes, right? From my own mind. They're all either were there and some are still there. But I make tremendous progress by using this method. So then if someone else seems to violate you, they aren't wrong unless you're hurt, right? Like there's my impulse to explain why I'm so hurt by taxes, even if I'm not, and why I need to believe that I'm hurt. But if I let go of that, then I can understand how someone's violating me without me needing to be hurt. And then that'll help you, this is blocking you from letting go of various ways that people have violated you. You want your goals to be adaptive, and you don't want to be trying to do something to achieve one goal, like increasing your income, and have all this garbage and baggage in there, right? That's not helpful. At least if you want to be hurt about things, then you can schedule some time for that. It's kind of funny, and then presumably you wouldn't want to do that. But this isn't just like some theory I have in my head. I watch this all the time when people are trying to do business. They spend a lot of time being hurt and then dealing with that and then causing a ripple effect from that, and then feeling separated from people and then not being able to influence them very well. And when you're focusing on how somebody hurt you, then you're not going to do a very good job influencing them to the way that you might want, right? We need to, obviously, to interact with people is to influence them. It doesn't mean manipulate them or not, but obviously we're just trying to, if we're trying to work together with people, then we're trying to share our ideas. Obviously when you're working together, and I'm just using it in the positive form when I talk about influence. And certainly if you think someone else is either violating you, or maybe they're not, maybe they're just not doing something that you hope that they will do, then you can think how to influence them. But if you accept that their choices and their resources are their property, they don't owe it to you necessarily unless you have a contract to do something, then, I plan to kind of delve into relationships and business relationships and so forth, which are a big factor in making a lot of money, I would say, especially making it fairly easily. But this, without uprooting this root or starting to uproot this, then it would keep blocking you, and you wouldn't even know what was going on because it's all invisible. We want to be thinking in terms of what's adaptive for ourselves, what's going to really get us what we want, and kind of single-mindedly be working. If I'm working to increase my income, then I don't want to be sitting around thinking how the people I'm working with are bad and not doing what they should and so forth. I instead, it's like a plant, right? I don't want to sit around thinking that the plant isn't growing fruit the way it should and wanting to yell at the plant, right? Instead, I just want to be thinking about what's going to help it grow. And as we understand that we're not our mind, then when we understand that our own mind is a mechanism, then we resolve. People are in this constant state of confusion and conflict when it comes to influencing other people, because they're constantly, it's like the berries I talked about last time too. There's two things going on and they don't realize it, and they kind of try to conflate it into one thing and keep bouncing back and forth, and that is between people's minds that are a mechanism, that are not conscious, like a plant, right? And then like a plant we presume is not conscious, and it's like a mechanism. And so then you deal with it as a mechanism, and you don't want to yell at it, presumably, unless you're anthropomorphizing it and confused. And then separately, you understand people are conscious, and they could seek to understand and so forth. But I generally don't count on that. But I will encourage it for sure. And also, we don't know how much stuff they might have to figure out. Like, it might seem easy to us, but another thing, the reason why I'm showing you this kind of deep-rooted thing or giving you an indication of it is there's so much going on. There's so many fallacies, piled upon fallacies, and stacked blurriness and issues going on in our minds that just expecting someone to untangle that on the fly is impossible, is ridiculous. And so somebody can be wonderful in seeking understanding and improving, right? Just like all of us together. And it doesn't mean that they should have figured everything out in that moment. So, so it makes me very differently patient with people and much more adaptive, again, in terms of trying to help them with the mechanism if they need help through a fallacy or a pep talk, or just to be help shown how to get unstuck with something kind of mentally or however. But if I'm sitting there feeling like they're bad and wrong and morally judging them, then that's really going to impede things massively, very difficult. It's like trying to influencing someone and slapping them in the face at the same time. That feels and looks counterproductive, presumably in most cases, right? But if you're judging someone in your head morally, then you're having the same effect or greater. A lot of us would rather be slapped than to have our someone judge us, truly judge us as bad, right? If in some cases, by delineating the property rights idea, then the beautiful thing about boundaries, people often think of boundaries as something to keep things out. So when I talk about property rights, it can look like I'm talking about morality, but or like what we should do, or presumably I don't sound like I'm preaching, but or if I maybe could sound like that. But the beautiful thing about seeing morality in terms of property rights is it actually opens things up greatly, and it helps us remove so much garbage that we might have regarding morality that isn't moral or immoral at all. Just this enculturated stuff, right? We're supposed to dress a certain way, speak a certain way, right? And go out to eat certain times and do this. So, people will just encourage us to go out and do something. Oh, you need to take a break, right? People might say, oh, you need to take a break. And there'll be actually moral overtones to that statement. Do you feel it? Right? So if someone walks in and says, oh, you need to take more breaks, right? Oh, are you still working? That's a moral overtone. By understanding property rights, that doesn't sink in, that doesn't seep in the same way. So it actually reduces or clears up your sense of morality, which is so important because when we're trying to make money or do anything else, it's constantly messing with our goals. When we have this kind of overburdened sense of morality and all these little random rules. Let's see what I wrote here. If someone else seems to violate, they aren't wrong unless you're hurt. Now, this is there's another false statement that the point here is that it'll flow, and so there'll be another false statement, compounding things. All forms of greater good. Oh, I'm sorry. This arrow is like an implies that imply. Imply all forms of greater good. I could have put this in. I could have put that in quotes. Imply that bad sometimes equals good. So we never want to buy into a greater good argument. This just kind of comes up when it comes to morality. It comes up with struggling. We only want to struggle to end struggle. We don't want to accept that we have to struggle. Chandra posted that nice video of the guy struggling to push the like a cartoonish type of thing, struggling to push a big ball up a hill. And I said that gave me a nice kind of teachable thing to say, where one way to look at alchemy is, instead of just struggling to push the ball up the hill, we're thinking, hey, how about that hill? Maybe we can find a way to get that hill leveled out or even downhill. So now the ball rolls downhill and kind of snowballs in a good way that way, right? Regarding and any kind of greater good argument, and this relates to enculturation, then you want to be, you don't ever want to accept bad, as I've said many times. You you ideally want to figure out, you might have to accept something temporarily, right? Because you can't change things in the moment. That's just, basically the moment's already passed. And you might not understand where the contradiction is or how to get out from under a struggle. That's totally fine. You can be patient. But ultimately, you want to realize that the world is rigged, so we're not here to struggle. We're here to just have good, tremendous good. Whatever we're here, it's possible for us to have even better, more goodness, and no badness, greater than just total bliss. Because God could give us total bliss already, automatically. He just take away our free will and make us feel happy as clams. And since God doesn't do that, then the only reason is for something even better to be possible. And so understand that, and we get there through what we're doing here. We're trying to understand these, what's at the root of things, and dissolve these false ideas until we get to where, for ourselves and then for other people, we get to where things are rigged to be. So we don't have to accept any kind of greater good arguments or suffer now so you can have more later. You might need to do something that you don't really want to do right now to keep your word or to get to a goal you're trying to get to. But what I don't want you to do is accept that it always has to be like that once you build and understand where that struggle is coming from and dissolve it at some point. Right, as I was saying, we have all these bazillion things that are part of culture. We want to start to look at those for what they are and think, do we really need moral overtones to so many bazillion things that are going to get in our way? What if we strike up a conversation with somebody that might maybe turn out to be a client or know some potential clients? And what if they kind of give us a look like I don't want you to be talking to me, and actually they might be morally judging us in their head and thinking, well, there's something weird or bad about us. That can seep in, right? That can be accepted if we don't have clarity. When we have clarity about what's moral and what isn't, right? If we were appropriate in our attempt to strike up conversation and talking to the person, we weren't violating their property in any way, then we can get to where we can understand that if the person's putting moral overtones into something that has to do with enculturation or anything like that, that we don't have to accept that, and we can that can become more clear in our mind. Also, it's just another example of why it matters to have our kind of morality, understanding of morality, more straight, so we don't get influenced by, because people can really manipulate us by adding moral overtones to a particular suggestion, or that we should do this or we should not do that. And we want to have that not have power over us over time. All sorts of goals regarding avoidance get stuck in our mind waiting to be triggered. Right? They're just we know this when we're dealing with other people, where we understand that their mind is kind of like a minefield. And we're like, oh, did I offend you? Oh, did I offend you? Oh, I don't want to offend you. Or even if you strike up a conversation with someone, is that going to piss them off or upset them, or and so forth. We can understand that's the case with other people, but we want to dissolve more and more of little things that get triggered in our own mind. And we want to overall not have a worldview where we should have all these things trigger us. And it's just exhausting to be morally judging people constantly. It just takes up mental space. And then when we do that, when we inappropriately judge people morally, then logically speaking, it comes back to us, right? We project onto other people that they're doing the same to us. We give more power to it when they're doing the same to us. Even if someone violates our property rights, what we can understand is that the idea that they're working on is incorrect. But we don't need to judge them as a whole, as a person, because how are we supposed to know at what point they're so surrounded? They're so surrounded by incorrect ideas, right? Were they supposed to figure it all out at the age of 2 or 3, even 20 or 30? Have we stopped and figured this out and worked on this very strongly? No, right? So, and even if we have, we don't know how long it might take somebody else to figure these various things out. So we don't want to judge a person as bad or a person as evil. We can understand that a system might have ideas that are evil, and that a person can act on those ideas and those actions we might categorize as evil if we want, but not to generalize that to the person. And to not say, well, the person should have realized that, because I just explained that. Why should they have realized it? Should you have realized all this? Should I have realized all that I'll figure out next week already? Right? There's things I'll figure out over this coming week. I'll be working a lot on alchemy just like I always do, right, and law of implication. Should I have figured out that stuff that I'm going to figure out earlier? Right? So why should someone else have already figured it out? Instead, let's just build more understanding for ourselves and share that. And, reasonably try, of course we can take precautions with people and so forth, but we don't need to be wrapped up with this stuff. Okay, so I developed this. This is why we're going to spend a lot of time together, right? I've allocated a lot of time. When things like this come up, I want to be able to delve into them and looking at these things. There's an example and contains teaching and also examples of other things we talked about. Okay, let me now go to there's two slides here. One is goalscaping. It's a new word. Words and new words. Words help us to see things. If we don't have a word, words kind of serve as a label for a category in our mind. Without a category, we can't really see something or think about it. Literally, there's been experiments with seeing like blue. Like there's a, I don't remember the name, but there's a group of people somewhere that doesn't have a word for blue. They have a zillion different words for green. Maybe there's most of the plants. Maybe there's not a lot of blue plants or very few. And they have a lot of words for green. They can shown like a bunch of green dots and then a clearly blue dot. They couldn't tell which one was which, hardly at all. Or they did fairly badly as a whole. And but then if you were to show you or me, presumably if we're different than that with green and blue, the nuances of green that they could see, we wouldn't see that. And we probably know this, right? Someone who's a painter can literally see many more colors than me or someone that's not a painter. But when I say painter, I mean like an artist type painter. But even a house painter might see many more colors because they have words and categories for those. So it's interesting, right? We actually do want to make distinct words that label categories like folders in our mind, and then we can kind of fill those in. But until we have the starting point for the distinction, then it can be hard to see and think about. As an example, I've said that, maybe not in a recording, but at least in my personal life, it's amazing there's no word in our culture for having a child when there's parents around of the mother or the father, especially the mother, probably practically speaking. If the parents live in the same town versus if they don't, if there's no relatives or parents in the same town, there's no word for that. So we don't really see that as a concept of having a child. We just think of having a child or having a child, and people talk, oh, it's easier, oh, it's hard. But practically speaking, it's just massively, massively different. As far as I can tell, I'm no huge expert, but and we don't have anyone that's a relative living anywhere near us. When they visit for a week, right now my parents are visiting for a week, it's radically different. I can actually go on dates, and so forth. We pretty much went a year or two with like basically close to 0 dates, when our son was born. But there's just no word, right, for whether parents, like grandparents, live right nearby or not. And so we can't really see that as a concept generally. People just think about having kids or not, or how hard it is in general, without, it's like the berries, right? It's like eating berries, and some people feel healthy, some might feel sick, just depending on which berries they pick, when you can distinguish them, right? And at least people would want to have some kind of plan or understanding of the difference. If generally people that have parents around are saying, oh, it's no problem, it's easy, you make do, and they don't realize that the way they make do is the parents help out. Even if the parents just watch the child for an hour every other day, hugely different than 0 hours, potentially. So that's just an example, a random example, but it's interesting to know what words can do. And it's because the word labels a category that's like a folder that can be filled with things, and it can let us see a distinction, just like with color. Okay, so let's have this word called goalscaping. And one of the big ideas and practices that I want you to build for yourself and live and experience from alchemy is this goal-scaping idea. It's that I want you to have a sort of constant. I'm gonna use like awareness and attention in kind of the normal sense, just the useful sense. The meaning you get from it will be fine right now. So have kind of a pretty consistent awareness. Doesn't have to be every moment, but generally where there's at least red flags. Maybe a little bit like driving, where you're not always aware, but you want to be aware enough that if something comes up, you have to, that you can react to it. You want to be aware of the goals that you want your mind and body to be pursuing at the moment, that you want your creative mind to be working on. Creative mind, the word creative can refer to different things depending on the context, whether we're talking about person or their mind and so forth. But again, kind of just using whatever the fairly simple, obvious meaning of like your creative mind is, like your mind is doing processing and working on something, right? And working on stuff subconsciously below your awareness. And that's why you'll wake up with an idea about something, right? You understand the difference when your mind is working on a problem that you're trying to solve and when it isn't, right? And you'll have thoughts about that problem that'll pop up and maybe ideas about it or that sort of thing. So what you want to do is be aware of this like goal-scape, like a landscape, okay? But instead of, normally people are aware of like the landscape, we could say. We could say goal-scaping versus landscaping. Normally people are sort of aware of like kind of the physical world, maybe the mental world in terms of thoughts, but it's all of where, by the landscape I mean where the goal pursuit is taking place. The playing field, the arena, both your, again, like your kind of thoughts and your actions in the world, you're typing on the computer, you're looking at the computer screen, that sort of thing is the landscape. Generally people are like just, even their almost full awareness, almost total is on the landscape, and there's very, very minimal awareness, if anything, about the goal-scape. And the goal-scape is, if let's say my mind is generally kind of calm, or at least I'm aware that if I'm intentionally thinking, okay, here's the problem, or here's the topic. Topic is a better word even. Either way. Here's the goal I want my mind to be pursuing right now. Here's the topic. So if I go for, we'll do this, certainly sometimes people will be working on a particular goal, right? They'll say, I'm going to go and try to, with scheduling, people do this to some degree, right? I'm going to, I'm going to try to learn this application, right? Or I'm going to try to work on my PBNs and send 10 links. But, so, let me think how to, so we'll have like a little bit of like maybe the surface of the goal-scape will be obvious to us, kind of like, it'll feel like what we want. That's what I say about we find out what's going to happen as the webinar goes. But I'll continue to develop this right now, and then perhaps I'll have some further thoughts that occur to me later, and I'll share them next week. But I live this, I do this, and it's definitely different than how people normally think. So one difference is that I'm pretty consistently intentional about what my mind is like working on and what I'm thinking about. Also, like what we call consciously, right? Just, you know, how you're kind of having thoughts, right, in your head about a topic, and I'm pretty constantly intentional about what that topic is, and that it's a topic that I want to develop. And when my mind starts to just kind of go in directions, I'm pretty aware, a little bit like if you're driving, then if you're generally aware of where your destination is, then that makes sense, right? And people will sometimes pursue goals like on purpose, but a lot of times they won't, especially when they're not like clearly on task. I sort of have a sense. I'm trying to think how else this manifests. Let's suppose I'm on the phone with someone and we're talking, then I have a sense of like, or if I'm talking, of like, what am I trying to accomplish by this? And people often just kind of meander away from that. And then the goalscape also has priorities. And one way that people tend to be way, way off is in terms of another place that I want to go ultimately with alchemy is to deal with the topic of, or look at life from the angle of resource management. And that, of course, relates to the idea like that I started talking about with priorities and importance. And people tend to be quite poor with resource management and priorities and importance unless there's another way to think of it is, and I'll develop this in the future. There's predictable errors that will end up cascading and snowballing into like big errors and big differences in how people do stuff regarding priorities, where people can be okay with resource management in certain very defined situations. They can do a good job. But when the situation is the kind of more or less and less defined, more open-ended, then people will tend to be worse and worse effectively at resource management and priorities and importance. Let me, a good way to continue with the goalscaping is to continue down here. The things I talked about last time when I talked about goal flexibility and how you, when you have a goal like to meet a woman or have a woman like you or marry you or whatever, or a goal to make money or a certain amount or whatever it might be, to get a client or whatever, then, or multiple clients, then as I talked about last time, your mind will make these sub-goals where you'll actually have a goal for certain types of feedback, and those sub-goals are counterproductive. It's being aware of that stuff that I'm talking about by the goalscape. So what normally people will do when I say they're looking at the landscape is their mind will just sort of switch gears on them from really effectively going after clients to a goal for feedback, where they want to have like approval or something, or like a good response. But in wanting that, that might be counterproductive in a number of ways. And people might also have a goal not to get rejected that gets triggered as well, and so forth. A person normally will just feel the goal. They'll like affirm, oh, I just want to get a client, or they'll kind of affirm the goal, like, oh, God, I just want them to say yes, right? Or I just want them to, right, do what I want, right? So people will kind of have a surface awareness of what they want, but they won't really have a sense of the goalscape, like I talked about, where they won't have an idea like, oh, wait a second, that's a goal for feedback. Wait a second, that's counterproductive. Hold on. Or you might have a goal to talk to someone and have it go well, but then that goal might no longer apply, where the person just isn't interested in talking to you right then, or something comes up. And then if you're aware of the goalscape, then you're flexible with the goalscape, rather than just trying to, what people will do is they'll be trying to win on the landscape. If a girl isn't the right girl for them to pursue, they won't necessarily realize that, and they'll just keep on trying to pursue it in different ways, rather than thinking about whether the goal to go after that particular person is still worth maintaining. And it may be, but you want to figure that out by looking at the goalscape rather than just the what I'm calling like just the landscape. Because again, your mind might have just might just be now trying to boost up your self-image. It might have discarded the goal of actually having a good relationship, right? Suppose someone starts whining at a woman they're hoping to date, right? Oh my gosh, I can't believe you said you love me, and now you're doing this, and whine. If the goal that was front and center was to have a happy relationship, and that's what the mind really was actively working on, it wouldn't come up with stuff like whining at somebody, right? That's pretty obviously maladaptive and counterproductive. So if it's the case that you feel like whining, or if you're trying to work on your website or rank something, and if you're feeling frustrated, or if you're feeling silly or stupid because something seems to be stuck, then you're staring at the landscape when instead, if you're looking at the goalscape, you could reorganize things so you would be responding more adaptively. You might think, oh, okay, wait a second. There ended up being a goal for an expectation of how long it was going to take to learn this particular application or to install the gravity form right on the website and have it work. Accidentally, when I went to, first there was a goal to install a gravity form on my website. Could happen. But then your mind twisted it, but you didn't see it because you weren't looking at the goalscape. You're looking at the landscape. You're staring at your computer, right, and watching recordings and trying to do it. But the goalscape changed, and you didn't realize it because you weren't looking at it. The goalscape changed to, okay, the mind kind of formed a projection and expectation. If I'm smart and if the world goes properly or whatever, then this will take me maybe an hour, and it'll go pretty smoothly, right? I won't have to backtrack or whatever. And now there's a goal for me to install the gravity form within an hour, or something along those lines, right? We can get even more granular, where like kind of moment by moment, there's a goal to understand and be able to apply what I just heard, rather than be poking around to try to figure out what a framework if I don't have it yet. So again, the goalscape changed. You didn't realize it, and now you're frustrated. You might still succeed ultimately, but among other things, it might have taken longer, it might not have, but if you're going to feel frustrated and feel pain, that's going to get recorded in your mind, and you're going to have avoidance later, and you're going to go to work later, and your mind can even generalize the pain to pursuing money in general, right? When you feel strong emotions, that's an indication that goes in parallel with your mind looking around in the environment for what's going on, what's different, what do we blame, what's the reason? Because your mind doesn't want you to that to happen again, right? You're feeling emotional pain because your brain feels like you're not making progress towards goals. Your brain doesn't like that. Your brain is a goal-achieving, pursuing mechanism. If your brain doesn't like feeling stuck, when I say it doesn't like it, I'm anthropomorphizing on purpose. Your brain doesn't not like things in the same way that you as a conscious being don't like things. Your brain doesn't actually feel pain. But your brain is trying to learn how to achieve the goals that it has encoded in it. If your brain encounters something that seems like you're being stuck, you feel pain. Your brain doesn't feel pain, but the pain that you're feeling, that emotional pain of not installing the gravity form fast enough, that's going to go along with your brain actually making neural connections that are going to trigger in the future that might just be generalized based on you just working in general or trying to work on a website in general, right? It's kind of individual, based on the individual situation and person, exactly what their mind is going to associate with that stuck situation that you feel pain. Again, your brain doesn't feel pain, but it feels something in parallel to it. It doesn't feel anything, I'm sorry, but it processes something in parallel to you feeling pain. And then it's going to trigger that pain again the next time whatever it decided was the reason shows up. And then might go to work and you're going to feel pain again. So by paying different attention to the goalscape, you can do work in a way that's more pleasant, and then you'll also avoid the compounding of that unpleasantness. When the next time you go to work, you feel avoidance and you don't even know why, and then you think you need more motivation, and then you think you need to listen to a motivational speaker and have a better mindset to overcome feeling, that association, that neuroassociation that got encoded. Whereas if you'd paid attention to the goalscape the whole time, you could have avoided that whole situation. You don't have to overcome something. You just didn't have that problem, that maladaptive encoding happen in the first place. And this will all develop. Everything I'm talking about here, again, we'll develop this over time. It isn't that I explain this and then either you or myself goes out and does this perfectly. But what I definitely do, and I live, and it's incredibly adaptive and effective for me nonstop. And alchemy, turning things into gold, that happens in my life, and it definitely is related big time. One kind of full angle of it is that I'm paying attention to the goalscape rather than getting immersed. What I do is, of course I can get immersed in the landscape of doing a task, but I'm aware of, just like when you're driving a car, you can just be listening to music and enjoying yourself, but you want to have kind of triggers that, whoa, wait, like you kind of wake up, right, and pay attention differently if a car gets close or if you think you missed your turn or something like that. And so it's like that. If something's unpleasant, or and also you can do this proactively. As you understand this better, you can work to set goals in such a way that you can set expectations in a way that is more parallel to like a stipulation than an assumption. So what I mean by that is, suppose I'm trying to think, oh, how many copies of Alchemy do I think I'll sell to people that are eligible to buy it? Then I might need to get a sense of what that might be, so I have a sense of whether just various logistics, right? What platform I might use and so forth. But I do that in a way that I understand. Remember, the law of implication fundamentally, what's the fundamental rule? You focus on what you can know, not on what you can't. So I can't know how many sales I'm going to make, for example. So I might get a sense of it's fairly likely to be in the following ballpark, whatever that might be. And I stipulate that. I use that to sort of, again, plan in whatever that number might be relevant. And I might use that in terms of how much resources I might allocate to various things, like how much I might take up other people's time or the coach's time helping to market it or support it or whatever. But I don't let it become a goal to meet that expectation, right? And so the way I do that is I picture the scenario in a way where I'm not going to get stuck at the expectation. I can picture hitting the expectation and how that would go, and then I think to the scenario of what if I don't hit the expectation, right? And then there might be less good if I don't hit the expectation, but less good isn't bad. There's always less good in the future than like if yet another extra good thing happened, right? If I was going to feel bad about not having as much good as I could possibly imagine, you can always imagine another sale, right? Like suppose that I would rather make as many sales as I could, and then, like if I could theoretically get an unlimited number of people into Alchemy, then there's always another number I could hit, right? What am I going to make 1,000 sales and feel bad I didn't make 1,050? That doesn't make any sense, right? So when you see that, it clearly doesn't make any sense to set up something where you feel bad no matter what, right? So once you prove it that way, you show the opposite is absurd. It shows it's absurd to feel bad just because you don't have even more good stuff. So I just picture, okay, whatever number I hit, it is fine, but I can picture how nice it might be to hit higher and higher numbers. I want to picture that in a scenario. Why? I picture it in a scenario because that's how you communicate with your mind. Your mind's a mechanism. But by me picturing the scenario, by me feeling juiced by that, that's an indication that my brain got it. My brain doesn't feel anything. It doesn't feel juiced. But if I feel juiced, then that goes in parallel. That's an indication that something happened mechanically in my brain where it is going to devote resources. And it's going to make me feel motivated. Both of us, me and the in parallel itself is going to devote resources to that rather than something else, which I may want, right? I think about it. Do I want to, is it a priority? Do I want to devote resources? Do I want my brain mainly making me feel motivated to get more people into Alchemy? Do I want to feel motivated to put some more focus into the sales letter and edit it versus write it the first draft and never want to look at it again, right? If my brain didn't have it encoded that it was a priority to make more sales, then it would make me feel like I don't want to edit it very much. Do you see? Separately, and even more so, of course, I want my brain to feel like it's a priority to do a great job for you guys' sake on these webinars, right? And then my brain and I do the best we can, right? But I make it a great priority. I devote a tremendous amount of its creative focus, or virtually all of it, to Alchemy these days. Only if there's a red flag that kind of comes up that I need to deal with something from OMG. I maintain OMG just great, but I on purpose scheduled things so that like nearly a year ago, or actually literally a year ago or more, I scheduled things so that we would do a launch, we would finish, we wouldn't be marketing OMG in an ongoing fashion during this year. So then that would leave a space open where I would likely do something like this, and then that space filled in, the idea filled in more and more, and now became a great time for it, and now I can focus on it. The other coaches, of course, are focusing on their aspect of OMG, so nothing's neglected, and of course this Alchemy itself supports OMG. But then my creative focus goes into this, and then my brain's and why I communicated properly, but there isn't, I'm not looking to like hit a grand slam necessarily, but I'm looking to do a solid job where I'm tending to things, and it's not, expectations are not set in my mind in a bad way, where I'm afraid of you guys. I'm not afraid that I'm going to do a bad job. I'm motivated to do a good job. I don't need to feel fear. Why? Because I did exactly like I said on my fear video. I carry through. Well, what would happen if things don't go optimally? Well, actually, of course, things aren't going to go optimally. What the heck is optimally, right? The exact perfect sequence of words on each webinar, right? What's that? I couldn't even know that if I did it, whether it was optimal. So then clearly it's going to go fine, right? I have plenty of practice doing this. I live it. I've been working on it for decades. I'm going to be putting so much focus into it over these months. So it's, it's going to be a reasonable success, just the same as if I jump into water, I'm going to be able to not drown unless the world is just radically, different than I remember it, where I'd have to doubt everything in life, right? If I drive to Starbucks, I'll get there, right? The world could massively alter, but of course we don't live our lives that way. And so worst case isn't very bad, right? These are going to go great no matter what, in basically the worst case. And then we kind of think through it from there. So you think through the scenarios of things happening different ways ahead of time, and that will keep that'll actually, you see, I was going to say that'll keep the goalscape from shifting invisibly on you by having clarity, right? Clarity stacking instead of blurriness stacking. Normally when people have a goal, it is blurry, and your mind tends to encourage blurriness, actually, which another thing I can get into more in the future. I've given some indications of that. Remember, what's the defense against the defense, right? If your mind's trying to protect you from realizing that you're helpless unless you have these resources, but that you're inherently helpless, which you're not. But if your mind believes that, then it's going to need you to stay blurry about a lot of stuff. And also, just the way your mind has developed, it's wanting to kind of manipulate you regarding goals and the way it goes. It doesn't really, by default, make you want to examine things too clearly. It's going to give you some resistance at first, perhaps. But you want to get things clear, or else you're going to run into the flexibility issue, right, of where you'll get your goal backwards, where your mind will accidentally decide, where's that slide, that accomplishing something is good because you have a goal. No. Ranking a website isn't good because you have a goal to rank your website. Ranking a website is going to lead to you having more goods, right, presumably. That's why it's a goal. your goals serve you experiencing good, not the other way around. You don't want to be a slave to your mind. If you're a slave to your goals, you're a slave to your mind. Your mind's in control, but your mind's not aware. It's not conscious. It's just a mechanism. You don't want that in control. By default, it will be, basically. And it maintains that control through blurriness. And other people do this to you too. Other people will start to get perturbed if you try to dig into the reasons for things and the reasons they want you to do things and so forth. And they can even start to intimidate you. And that's just their minds doing the exact same thing. Once you understand how minds work, of course their mind is going to do that. And their mind's in control of them. Their mind wants blurriness for a number of reasons, doesn't want things examined too closely. And it's also going to try to intimidate you and your mind, like two dogs barking at each other to establish territory. You'll understand other people so much better as you understand your own mind and how it works better, for which it's important to distinguish the two. I'm actually close to wrapping up the monologue portion of this and get to some discussion about this. But if something gets twisted so that it's good, like ranking a website is good because it's a goal, then you just start wanting to accomplish. It becomes circular in a bad way, where if you get stuck, you'll want to rank the website. What if that website just isn't going to rank very well? Or what if there ends up being some other priority to do, like ranking a different website where you could get more bang per buck out of your resources? Separately, as we develop the life as resource management, then we can see things that way. It's going to give another enlightening angle on things and enlightening angle on the goalscape. But getting a particular woman to validate you or sleep with you or marry you, or getting a particular website to rank, or even making a certain amount of money, it's not good because you have the goal to do it, but your mind's going to accidentally reverse it that way. By keeping your mind on the goalscape, in order to keep your mind on the goalscape, you also have to keep your mind on your awareness of good in your own experience, your conscious experience of good. And if a goal is no longer serving you, then you may want to drop it. Now watch out, because just because you feel bad or it's a struggle to achieve a goal, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you should drop a goal just because you don't feel like it. What I'm saying is it might be good to achieve the goal. There just might be a contradiction or one of those avoidance things that I've referred to earlier here that gets stuck in your mind, right? Like if you go to install the gravity form I was talking about, and you feel frustrated and upset, and then your mind generalizes that to working on websites and SEO, and then you go to do SEO, and because of that association yesterday, you feel resistance. That doesn't mean you should just drop the goal and go get ice cream, but it does mean that by paying attention to the goalscape, you could say, oh, okay, wait a second. First, let me think rationally about this. Let me step back. Do I want to really achieve this goal? Is it still adaptive? Well, yeah, working on your SEO business, especially if it's, imagine you have a client, you're working on your SEO business, of course that's adaptive. Or even if you don't and you're building up your understanding, yeah, that's adaptive. So you keep the goal. Even if you feel resistance, you still want to go do it. But if you're pursuing something, especially like a goal for an expectation, you could say, oh, wait a second, I'm going after I'm getting myself worked up and I'm in a panic because I have a goal to make $10,000 a month, and it's set in time, like it needs to be this month or next month. Is that adaptive? Actually, no, that's no longer adaptive. I'm going to put that off maybe for a couple of months, and then I can reassess then. And you could say, wait, isn't that confusing? No. If the landscape changes, you want to step back and decide what's an adaptive goal, and then you understand you don't have goals. Your mind does. Your mind is like a robot, an employee that's a robot, not an employee in terms of, I'm not denigrating employees there. I just mean this in only the positive sense. If you think of your mind like kind of like an employee for a moment, except not the conscious part of the employee, then you might want your mind, you might think, what do I want my mind going after? If my mind is trying to earn $10,000 a month in the next 3 weeks, that might actually be maladaptive because there might not be time for me to get the proper foundation, and then I might be just trying to skip steps and take shortcuts that are like short circuits that aren't helpful. So actually I want to give my mind more time. So I want to, I think 3 months, as the best I can tell right now, 3 months is a good window. So I want my mind to be trying to accomplish it within 3 months. That will make it, the reason I'm putting 3 months to it would be because I want it to devote maximum resources. Now you don't necessarily need to do any deadlines at all, but if you find that's helpful, then fine. Okay, so you picture it that way, but then you and what you do is you picture how much better off you'll be if you focus in and accomplish it within 3 months, as if you dawdle around and take 9 months. Or you can notice that if it's not 3 months, then when? Maybe it won't even be 9 months. Maybe it'll just be procrastinated on out into the future indefinitely. That can happen with our timeline. Our mental timeline is it can always be 2 weeks out. That can happen sometimes, so you don't want to do that. If you spot that, then you need to kind of pin it down in time. But then even when you're setting that goal of, all right, in 3 months I'm going to be at $10,000 a month, that can include that if at that point I need another 2 weeks, okay, but up until then I want that to be because I devoted the maximum appropriate resources to that, and then that still wasn't enough, and then I might give some extra time at that point. But that all was showing you how I look at the goalscape rather than the landscape. I'll develop all that more. Let me discuss a little bit about you not being your mind, and then that you not being your mind is something I'll continue to develop consistently. And then I'll kind of give a little bit and then maybe talk to you back and forth about it a little bit instead of just having to be a monologue about you not your mind. Okay, and the difference between your brain and your mind is that your brain it might be all of your mind, it might not. If your mind is like in the physical world on Earth, then if it's destroyed, then you would have no more mind if your entire mind is encoded just in your brain. If there's something that lives on after your body dies, your brain dies on Earth, then if anything lives on, or if there's any semblance of you left, then there would have to be part of your mind would have to be encoded somewhere other than your brain, right? Other than your physical brain. So I leave that open. I presume that I'm quite certain that it has to be that way. Otherwise, again, if our only life was on Earth and then we died, there would be no reason for God to make things where there's possibility of bad in the first place. But that might be more reasoning than you have all worked out for yourself. But that's how I get there, where there's no way it all ends just right after our life here on Earth. So then there would have to be some mind, some place where your mind is encoded in addition to in your physical brain. You might call that a soul or something like that. If that's the case, you're also not your soul. So your soul is just another aspect of your mind in that case, right? Your body, your physical body, that's in essence an extension of your mind, or like a, kind of a robot that your mind gets to, kind of control, to kind of operate here on Earth. So how do we know that you're not your mind then, right? So your mind is like the information processing, right? Where it's encoded might be a brain or soul or whatever. All of that together, that's fine to just sort of mash that into one ball for now, mind, brain, whatever, body. All of that isn't you, and when you think it's you, then all kinds of problems happen. When you differentiate them, then it opens up we could say a huge can of worms, but that's kind of a negative way of looking at it. It opens up a vast new arena. The logical ripple effects of you and your mind being distinct are nuts, and they're not going to pop to mind right away. I've developed this for a long time. I'm still working on it, but I have so much that I've developed based on this. But it opens you up to everything, and until you make this distinction, you're going to keep running into what amounts to a wall or confusion in trying to follow what I'm doing. You'll get like nuggets here and there, but you'll feel this sense of like, I'm not really getting this, to some degree. You'll be like, I like this, it's cool, probably, right? I just say that from experience. Just people seem to feel pretty happy about our interaction. And you can sense that, something's going on, right? But that's helpful. But this is a bottleneck. This is one of the things that you're going to need to break through in order to progress. And it doesn't have to be this minute, right? Remember the expectations, projections, goals for feedback. You don't need those. More good sooner is nifty. That's nice, but you don't need to feel bad about not getting more good sooner or having this breakthrough sooner. If you have it in 10 years, then you're wildly better off than if you never got to it. And this is what distinguishes my training, Law of Implication, Alchemy, from other teachings. Once in a while, in rare occasions, they might affirm a statement like this, you're not your brain or something. It turns out that what they mean it ends up being different than what I mean and what I understand. As in all my experience, of course, I don't know everything out there. I'm not all-knowing. But every time. So, and no one's put it in the popular culture. No one's even put it in alternative culture in a way that's gotten to me at all. And no one's really close from what I can see. I don't take pride in that. I actually want to not have that be the case. As I've said in different ways, I don't have any. I'd love it if there was more messengers of this. I'm good. I'm all right. I'm fine. I'm all good. Just want to get this out there. So whenever I talk about this being unique as I understand it right now, I'm only doing that to help you not accidentally think you got it when you don't. That's all I'm saying. All right. So one of the funny things is when you do think that you're your mind, then you, as a conscious being, and you say, what's a being? It's just a placeholder word for you are aware, you're conscious of what you're aware of, whatever. And I mean that in the simplest sense possible, right? You're either not aware of anything or you're aware. Right? I call it your consciousness field. Something's aware of that, and that's you. That's my entire original constructed definition of you. There's no other baggage with it. We might discover more about you, but nothing else is true by definition about you. Anything else would be true by logic, by building, by construction, by seeking understanding and investigating. You don't need to understand anymore. The reason people have trouble understanding what I just said, if they have trouble with it, when I say you are conscious of your consciousness field, that's it, until you develop more understanding until you build more. But by definition, that's it. The reason people are saying, like, well, where are you then? And that's why my talk about God was helpful, and why I'll probably need to develop that more, not even exactly just about God, but about understanding when you try to base your sense of your foundational understanding of reality in the model that there's a physical world and everything kind of gets built from that, then you can't figure out where you are as a conscious being because you're not in that exactly. You're not metaphysical either. The whole idea of metaphysical or physical, it's not relevant when you understand the world as I do. If you just do it without baggage, it's actually really simple. If you don't try to build who you are off of starting with the physical world, if you just build it off of the fact that you're aware of your consciousness field. And what's your consciousness field? Whatever you're aware of. And then you might say, well, what's in there? Well, what is it? That's it, just what you're aware of. We know it's there because the opposite of it being there is you'd literally be aware of nothing. Zero. You wouldn't know that you exist. You wouldn't have any thoughts. You couldn't hear me. Nothing. If you can hear something, you're aware of something. If you can think something, you're aware of something. If you see stuff, or I could say if you seem to hear stuff, if you seem to think, if you seem to see, then that's all going on by my own definition of the term in your consciousness field. The simplest meaning of that is all I mean. You can't figure out what your consciousness field is if you try to build it off the physical world. You can't get from your normal model of the world to what your consciousness field is. Instead, you just get there directly. Your consciousness field is foundational properly. It's the proper foundation for building understanding of things. Once you're there, once you get a sense of what I mean by consciousness field, and again, it's the opposite of being aware of nothing. All right, that's your consciousness field. You don't have to worry about what it is. Just think about what it is, what it isn't, and then it should fill itself in, or the beginnings of of an idea of it, which is all you need, should fill itself in. Then there's you. Now, one of the things about you is, logically speaking, you can't change. You see, the meanings of a word can't change. If the meaning of a word changes, that's called equivocation. You're being illogical. Or your mind, whatever, you're thinking illogically. The meaning of something can't skip around. It has to stay fixed, or else you're changing the meaning of a word. Right? To look at it, to see it more simply, if I say to someone, do you want a hug? And they say yes, and then I pick their pocket, take their wallet, and walk away, then they might say, whoa, wait a second, I said you could hug me, not take my wallet. And I say, oh, well, I changed the meaning of the word hug into, it means take someone's wallet. And so, and you said I could hug you, and so you gave me permission to take your wallet. Right? That's a clear, big, easy to see instance of changing the meaning of a word, and why we don't do it, why it doesn't make any sense. We can't think that way or live that way. It destroys the whole sense of thinking. Thought doesn't work at all if we change the meaning. 99% of something isn't that something. It's different, right? And to give an illustration that makes that clear to see, if you're on an island with 100 people and 99% of the people are not a serial killer and 1% of the people are, then that's radically different than if 100% of the people are not a serial killer, right? So a part does not equal a whole. If something changes, it's not the same thing, right? This should be simple, except to your brain, it's not simple. Your brain is built differently. It's not built to do logic. It's built to do something totally different. Your brain actually makes associations. Well, think about what an association is. An association is one thing associated with something else. Are those two things the same? No. Your brain associates the word tree with like a whole meaning of the word tree, a visual image, a plant, all sorts of stuff. But all the meanings that go with the word tree are not identical to the symbol tree, right? The physical shape of the words or the sound tree. So your mind associates those like they're the same. Your mind associates all your different experiences and instances and visual perceptions of a person. It puts all that together in one folder and says, oh, that's one thing. So your mind is built to deal with categories, actually, and labels of categories, and it's basically built to say a whole bunch of stuff, different things are the same thing, and to make meaning out of that. In other words, when you see your mother when you're an infant, your mother looks different every single time you see her, right? Different angle. I mean, right? Like if you were to take a snapshot of your mother, those snapshots would be different each time you take a snapshot, right? Like the pixels would be different. It would all be of your mother. They would have a similarity because it's all of your mother, but they would be different. And if she cuts her hair, then there's that change and so forth. Your mind is meant to take all of those different snapshots and say that's one thing. And that helps. That's adaptive, but what you need to do, it doesn't do logic. You see, your mind does something other than logic, and it actually works counter to logic. Logic is something, like I talked about the dehydrated milk. Logic is like water that you need to add to your mind. Your mind just simply doesn't function logically, period. Logic is something you impose to help correct ideas in your mind. Your mind isn't logical or illogical. It's like illogical. It just doesn't play on that playing field naturally by default. Okay, so logic won't feel right necessarily. Like logical statements that are logically true won't always feel right. Sometimes they will. Like 2 + 3 = 5 feels right because it's encoded in your mind. You triangulated it. So you feel something is true because your mind forms associations that it's true. Has nothing to do with whether it's actually true or not. It may be true, it may not. So don't confuse feeling whether something's true. That's just encoding in your mind versus whether something's actually true. What we want to do is stop consciously and just look at it in clear, distinct, obvious, A clear, big, obvious, to make a long story short, and I'll make the long story long at a different time, but a long story short, if something's big, distinct, clear, and obvious, so it only takes a few points of obvious difference to see that something's different, then you can distinguish it consciously. And that's going to be the basis for how you know things. So if we make a big, clear, obvious distinction for you that you can be aware of consciously, then that's where you could, that's good. That's the correct way to build understanding. So let's just stop for a second together and look at it. If something changes, is it the exact same thing? That's all. Just look at that. If something changes, is it the exact same thing? That must not be the case, right? Now, if we start to think of examples, then we can start to confuse ourselves and think, well, my body can change, a dog can change or move around, and I would still say it's the dog. Stay away from the confusion. That gets past what you can deal. Oh, don't worry, we'll iron all that out. That's not going to be a problem ultimately. That's not like a thing I haven't figured out or anything. But the problem is, if we were to say you can't know something unless you defeat every possible ridiculous counterexample, I can always, infinitely, I can come up with confusing things to say to you about any topic, right? If whatever we might talk about, if I said, can you swim? And I could just keep coming out with, well, but can penguins fly? You'd be like, well, you know, or, well, what is water, really, right? Or, are you alive? If you're swimming, you must be alive, right? So what is life, right? I could keep coming up with like statements that might be confusing, and that's a proof that just because I can come up with confusing statements, it doesn't mean that you don't know something simple and clear. Or if we say 2 plus 3 equals 5, if I say, yeah, well, how do you know it's not 787? And then if you try to show me that, well, how do you know it's not 1001? Well, how do you know it's not 2000? That the fact that I can come up with some statement and ask you to disprove it doesn't mean that you can't know that 2 plus 3 equals 5. Because imagine if you try to affirm or live based on the idea that you haven't the slightest idea whether 2 plus 3 equals 5, that you don't know it, right? If you just don't know, then that would just be ridiculous to try to say that, right? So we're back to, if something changes, is it the exact same thing? No. If the meaning of a word changes, I just equivocate it. So if you change, you're not you anymore. You went away. You no longer exist, and something else took your place. And now I'm incorrectly and illogically calling it you. So you can't change and keep referring to yourself as you. You have to be like, oh, I died. Oh, I'm a whole new thing. Oh, I'm a whole new thing. Oh, I'm a whole new thing. Right? And have no sense of continuity, which again would be absurd, ridiculous. You couldn't live that way. You couldn't even start to think based on that because it's crazy. And when something's that crazy, you can examine it even deeper if you want and figure out even more distinctly why it's wrong. But another thing you can do is just move along and work on something else. And you can come back to that later if you want. But we have other things that are more important to figure out than, at least I do, than if I can see something very clearly and distinctly, then that's great. I can move along and worry about it later. This whole model works so well and has incredible explanatory power, and it functions in the world just great. So I don't need to, I don't know, go into it more and more and more for myself, but I've gone into it plenty. But so what you need to confront is the idea that you cannot change. If you were to change, you no longer exist, and something else would have taken your place. That's what change means. There's no such thing as change as you generally understand it, right? You have, by default, people have, generally in culture, people have an incoherent, an inherently contradictory idea of the word change or the idea of change. People think that things can change. What's inside of a folder is what can change. A word can refer to like a category, basically, and or like a placeholder, and that can change, right? You can, the way a dog looks can change, but then there's something about the dog that has to stay static for me to keep using the same name for that dog, Fido, or whatever, Spot. But stick with yourself. You don't, again, just because you can think of confusing thoughts doesn't mean that you can't grasp some clear, simple, baseline, foundational thoughts. So, and the foundational thought here is that you cannot change. If you were to change, you would no longer exist, and there's no. It's a contradiction in terms, because even if I try to talk from that, I make no sense. If I say you change, and then if I say you no longer exist, and you replaced you, it just becomes absurd. Everywhere you try to go off of the idea that you can change, you end up with absurdities because it's inherently contradictory, because it would mean that the meaning of a word would have to change. So you don't become something different. Whoever you are has to be something that can stay the same. So that's one of your qualities that we figured out. Your mind processes. It does stuff. It moves around. Right? It has to have something similar to motion. It's not actually motion. It's mixing. Like I talked about with alchemy. Your mind mixes concepts. It processes. It does stuff. It's a mechanism. It can't be you. And you could say, well, how can your mind change and still be the same mind? Well, again, we need to understand how things can change within a category. Like what's on a TV screen can change. But then if you're referring to the TV screen, when we talk about your mind, we're referring to like the TV screen in parallel, and what's on the screen can change. But the meaning that you mean by TV screen, that wouldn't change. And this might click for some people. Some people might want to be where you're going to be confused is this opens up lots and lots of questions. But realize you don't need to answer questions, just like you don't need to know what 3 plus 4 is in order to know that 2 plus 3 is 5. Right? So when we start thinking and learning arithmetic, it opens up lots of potential questions. What's 7 plus 8? Right? What's 7 times 8? That kind of thing. But just because you can think of lots of new questions that you want to ask, it doesn't mean you can't grasp some simple and clear ideas. So you are something that doesn't change. Your mind isn't you. There's other ways we can look at it. The confusion is always going to come by accidentally reverting to try to build our mind out of the physical world, off of the foundation of the physical world. So if you're confusing yourself, then you're going back to the wrong foundation and trying to build from there. We'll get better at building from the right foundation. I'll develop that more with you. But let's start to take a look. If we're not our mind, and I said I would go to discussion soon, and I'm getting closer. I'm getting quite close. But if we're not our mind, then we're the one that's conscious. Our mind is not conscious at all. It's a mechanism. So what is it? What is this mechanism for? What does it do? And the way I have explained it many times, and this works very well, is to think of your mind as like a goal-achieving mechanism. But you have to keep reminding yourself that your mind doesn't have actual feelings. Your mind doesn't have intentions. It's like a mechanism, a little bit like of a car. A car by inertia looks like it wants to maybe go forward, right? Like if you start up your car and you put it in drive, with most cars, my car doesn't actually do this for whatever reason, but they kind of jump forward a little bit, right? It's like they want to go forward. And we can project onto that car that it like wants to move forward. And there's a useful correctness to saying it wants to move forward if we understand what we mean properly. But if we think of it like there's an actual intentionality to it, where it's upholding this goal like on purpose to go forward, that's a misunderstanding. Your mind, there's what we think that there's a level of reality and intentionality to our mind that there isn't. It's not even there, and it's very liberating as you come to understand this. It's a beautiful thing. Your mind is trying to achieve the goals that are in there. And there could be a whole bunch of them, and they can get triggered in different situations. Your mind has all these dormant goals, too, that get triggered according to the situation when they're appropriate, including avoidance type of feelings. But what's underneath those, that's why I started this discussion the way that I did. I gave an example of it. if we regress it out, if we go and look, where did that come from? Well, where did that come from? Well, where did that come from? There's nothing there. It was just our parents got it from somewhere and it made sense to them and they said it and it's in our culture or whatever. But our mind isn't like it. People tend to think, and our mind kind of, again, it's not conscious, not doing this on purpose, but it serves to our mind, we're kind of an impediment in a sense. And so because our mind is trying to achieve the goals as configured right now. So if you're paying attention to the goalscape and looking to shift those goals, well, shifting the goals in your mind actually impedes your mind's ability to achieve the existing or then previous, if you shift them, configuration. So you're trying to mess with your mind's goals while your mind is trying to achieve the goals, the original goals. If you're trying to mess around with that, and if you're questioning the goals in your mind's like, well, wait a second, this isn't helping me achieve the goals that I have. And so, metaphorically speaking, and so it resists that. It's like, no, I want to keep things blurry. I don't want you looking too closely, because that could get in the way of achieving goals. We can rewire this whole system, but that's how it is by default. So you're basically an annoyance or impediment to your mind, what you do consciously by default. That, again, it can all get rewired so it works better, and so it's not so much resistance. But again, if you understand your mind is trying to achieve the goals as currently configured and doesn't want those to be messed with, or it doesn't want you to say, whoa, wait a second, let's take a moment and examine this. And the funny thing is, once you see this with your own mind, it's also the case with other people's minds. So other people's minds will react the same way to you as your own mind does once you see it this way. And you'll navigate the whole process so much more effectively when you understand what's going on. So your mind's not conscious. There's no all-wise thing going on at the root of your mind's system and model of the world, but it likes to make us believe that that there is, and a lot of us believe that about ourselves, right? Oh, there's like deep wisdom down there. I just have to access it. Well, no, that's not true. Correct ideas can get filled in by asking the right questions and seeking understanding and having things be built that way. But it's not like coming from some deep reservoir of all the answers that are already in your mind's model that you're just accessing or that you're tuning into. So much of the resistance, like people ask, like, I wish I can control my mind better, David. How do I control my mind better? Well, I'll tell you what's blocking you ultimately from controlling your mind in the way that you'd like. In one sense, you don't control your mind. It's a mechanism that you don't have full awareness of or control over. But in another sense, you can build your mind to be differently, the model that your mind works off to be differently in a way that gets you all the benefits that you want out of controlling your mind. So you can get all those, well, almost everything and more, actually. Most everything, and then a lot more on top of that you weren't even thinking of, you can have regarding what you want out of controlling your own mind and influencing others, building things the way that I'm helping you build here. And we have a lot more to go. But there's a deep block, right? And so much what we do together is we dig down and we get to this block that no matter what mindset we have, no matter what observations we make, no matter how much stuff we learn about self-improvement and mindset, it only helps to a limited degree because of a deeper block that people don't recognize because they don't have the distinctions to see them. There's certain distinctions that I have that I don't see other places. And until they see those distinctions, they can't get to things that can build off those distinctions. And this block is this idea that that your mind has this wisdom, that there's this reality to your beliefs, and there's a foundation there. So there's a feeling that your mind gives you, that there's a reality and a foundation to the thoughts and the feelings that it gives you that isn't really there. And one of the things I want to, I believe next time, but we'll see how things progress, but I want to talk about foundations in your sense of reality. and what reality means in terms of foundations. It's going to be really cool when I get to that. And the reason why that matters, it's not because I just like to do philosophy or not. It's because it serves as a deep down, powerful, powerful block, and like an absolute block, where so many benefits that you can get in life, you're totally locked out of, unless you have this series of distinctions that I'm giving you. I'm not just doing this because I think it's cool or because I'm interested in these topics. I'm interested in these topics because I wanted to break through for myself, and I kept digging and digging, what's blocking, what am I missing, what am I missing? And when I found these blocks and these distinctions, and then it was like amazing what it opened up, and I could accomplish and view things so much more accurately, and I could build models that actually worked and didn't keep not working. Generally, our models for the world, they just don't work very well when it comes to our own minds and other people's minds, and our own motivation and all kinds of stuff, and people feel bad and frustrated and all kinds of maladaptive things, as I've been showing you and showing you. So it's not that this is what I want to do with my life, or this topic interests me, or that I want to share this. It's that in order to get to what we want in life, this is what's blocking us. And I've identified these things, and now that I've identified them, they're so monumental and so beautiful to dissolve, and what you can build the right way once you have it right, that I basically need to share with you for your sake. Like the benefit to you is so great that even if it means that I have to work at this and take this time, it's worth it, right? Just like if you know how to set somebody's leg and they break their leg and you're on a camping trip and you were just sitting down to drink a cup of coffee and read a book, you would like to drink the coffee and read a book, but if their leg's broken, you'd rather set their leg than have them hurt and you just sit there, right? So that's kind of how I feel. Okay. I do not think I put all these topics to rest. I think that I'm discussing them with you on an ongoing basis to help develop things. And we need to dig and remove blocks and build out some of our understanding. Also, you will feel that this stuff is true later. You need to discover it, and then you won't feel it until your brain like triangulates and encodes it and experiences it in a certain way. But you start it by realizing, okay, this has to be right, and then building off of that and acting off of it, and then you'll feel it later. If you're trying to feel it that it's true first, it's another block that you'll forever be locked out of. But that's more as we discuss things in the future with reality and how it's going to, this block I'm talking, that's all, what I just said is kind of an angle on that same block that I said is so powerful, which is this idea that there's a reality to your feelings and thoughts and your beliefs. They feel so real and so foundational. We're not going to be able to get where we want to get to, and we're going to be controlled by our mind until we break through that better and fully, where we stop feeling like these feelings have this reality to them that's not really there. Okay, let's go to the phones and talk a little bit, and then that'll be the webinar, although, of course, we haven't talked for a bit. So realistically, we'll be going for a little bit, decent amount longer. I'll just drink something for a second. A couple of people, John and Peter, posted some questions that I may or may not get to today. But all they're kind of a little bit deep anyway, things that I'm building towards always. And I know some of these are from before. What if something, I'm sorry, I should read this also, because it'll be on an MP3. And I might come back to some of this. I might experiment with going to the more recent statements first, so we can kind of have a talk and then take a look at some of the previous stuff as time permits, or get to it in the future. What if something causes someone harm, but they asked for it? Yeah, right, exactly. Well, that's a good example of it's just not true that, let me put the slide up, that if you hurt somebody, that is bad. It's sometimes you can hurt somebody in a sense. Sometimes something you do can be characterized as hurting, but it wasn't necessarily bad. You didn't violate their property. They asked you to do it, or they were hurt, but they had no business being hurt. They just decided to be hurt. right? And so you could hurt someone and it's not bad, or you could it could even be the case that you hurt someone and it's helping them. Or I could say, so sometimes helping someone will hurt, like giving someone a shot or something if that hurts. And sometimes you can hurt someone, but you weren't actually doing a real violation. That's why this statement is actually, it's funny, like blurriness. It can look so innocent, and this statement can look so innocuous or even helpful, and yet it just leads to a cascade of problems versus getting it right. And we'll see that recur all over the place in our lives. What David is talking about is an incredible shortcut for greatly reducing drag. We've used it for years, yeah. Mike and I talk, virtually every day. And we have for like over 10 years at this point. And before that, we talked a lot and worked together on things. I was just talking to an affiliate today on the very topic in a situation that was very important to him, and the affiliate reported it was very helpful. Oh, nifty, that's so cool. Yeah, by the way, it's kind of funny. I can't use a lot of examples that I'd like to use. Like in my life, a lot of what I do is deal with people, right, and solve issues with people. And so it kills off so many examples I could otherwise use, because I'd be giving examples of issues that could be personal with people that you might know, and so forth, or someone that you could close enough, or that might be listening, like my wife, or or whoever it might be, like someone from my personal life that you don't know but that would hear this. So many examples that I would otherwise use are closed off to me, which is we just have to work around that. That's why I need to bring up like government stuff sometimes, whatever, just to get somewhere we can use examples. I'll go down to the bottom in a moment, but let's read what John Suska wrote. Since November 2015 and until last month, I have reported to a boss, that's in quotes, who is actively working to destroy my reputation among the management team of the company, while all along pretending, saying to my face to be helping me and on my side. It was blatantly obvious and very damaging. I began to view him as an evil person and had to find a way to sever my relationship, very difficult since I worked there for now. Not sure what I could have done differently, if anything, but because I've been listening to the LOI materials, I immediately recognize this behavior as a property rights violation, the behavior right on the boss's part. What can a person do to counter or deflect or offset this sort of thing? Great, I like having an example. When you're in a situation like that, you can only get out of it, you can build your way out of it theoretically, but it may take a while to build your way out of it. Just like with any goal, it might take a while, right? What you want to do, though, with a goal, any kind of fruit that you want, any kind of target that you want to hit, you can identify the target, and then it's a question of what's the most effective way to achieve that target, which is always going to be to building the context until it fills itself in, right? Some form of that. And then separately, do I want to devote resources to this or not? Is it a priority or not? So like for me, taxation is kind of like this, where I want to get out of it. It's a property rights violation. In one sense, it's massively important, right? It eats up half of my financial resources every year, or roughly that. However, if I think of it like that, then it can look very important. But then if I look, well, do I want to devote resources towards it? Well, really the only way to get rid of it is going to be what I'm doing anyway, which is to spread correct ideas, right? It's part of why I like to sprinkle some ideas about the correct understanding of government into things, because it helps me towards one of my targets, which is to remove taxation and more like that. So what you want to be able to do is approach things like this strategically. It's not going to help you to feel bad about it. And what I just shared about, you're only hurt like if you feel bad, right? You want to be careful, John, about feeling like this guy is not, see, what you can do is you can develop this idea that this guy's evil. And then that can become a goal to actually reinforce the idea that the guy's evil, the boss is evil. And then to accomplish that goal, you actually need to feel bad, because the worse you feel, the more evil that guy is. You see how this works in your brain? So that's not helpful. So we want to let go of that. You can understand the property rights violation, but you can also understand that property rights violations happen right and left against us. If you're working, it's one of the reasons why one of my solutions was to come up with a threshold of how much money do I need to be comfortable or to survive, whatever. And then at least what I said is after that amount, if I can get to that amount, then at least there I could easily say I'm not going to feel bad regarding money. Now, I also thought it through and said, I don't want to feel bad even if I go below or I don't hit that amount. But it's particularly easy. It's super simple for me to see if I can get to a certain amount. Right? For me, I've talked about this as like $3 million. $3 million buys you a luxurious house and car. It buys you a comfortable life, given that those are paid off. It gives you a comfortable life up to 60 for another million, for one of those 3 million. So, right, there's three buckets of million. 1 million gets you a super nice car and house. You can always get a nicer one, so you can't win if you try to get the nicest one possible. But you can be super comfortable, and then for $1 million you can be super comfortable, live super comfortably for a second million, up to about 60, and for another $1 million you can get about roughly $10,000 a month with something like an annuity instrument. From 60 infinitely, as long as your body lives on it. So there's a threshold, and of course, once you quantify that, you can try to cut it in half if that's more realistic for you or whatever. Right? It's going to be some fairly large number that you're not going to. That's going to be large enough that you have to accumulate a decent amount of money. But at least it gives you a target to hit. But then you can chill out and say, I'm going to look to chill. I'm going to look to hit that target. And so forth. And then anyway, what you want to do overall is look for the most adaptive way to achieve the real target that you want to hit. Do you really want to hit the target of believing that that guy's evil really strongly? That's probably not what you want. What you want is to, then this is why I got to that 3 million thing. Really, when I'm dealing with a career, when it comes to money, I'm looking to at least get out of money being important in a way that, like, I wanted there to be a limit, an end point of when money was important in a certain way where I was going to have to basically just do stuff I didn't want to do, clearly didn't want to do in order to make money. Like this alchemy stuff, I'll make a bit of money from it, but it's very much irrelevant in terms of I'm not doing it for money. I wouldn't do it for the money. I wouldn't work nonstop for months. I absolutely would if I needed to, but then I'm at the point now where I don't need to work where the reason is money. But that's clear in my mind. People will sometimes say that, but they don't have it all distinguished. I have it clearly delineated for myself. So I would think, what target do I really want? Make it clear, make it not cluttered up with other goals that are related to it, and then look to build my way out of it, one way or the other. Obviously, you could make it alternative income, or you could just hit a certain amount, which would probably take an alternative income. It's hard to hit what you need to hit with a job. Things like that. So hopefully, I think that was great. That sparked a number of illustrations for me, especially where you can see the goal to believe somebody's evil. You can also dissolve that by understanding, as I pointed out earlier, that we'll never know enough. We're not omniscient. We won't know enough to know that someone's actually evil. We can understand that an action's evil, and we don't need to have a goal for that because we can just say, okay, that's a property rights violation. It's wrong. It's evil. But we've all done property rights violations, presumably. Even if we hadn't, it's not relevant. We don't need to get justice for property rights violations. Morality is to set a boundary for yourself and also to reduce how you're judging other people, not to make it even worse as well. Socialists constantly use the greater good argument as the excuse, right? Correct. We don't want to believe in greater good, and certainly not as a justification for clearly violating someone's property. Not quite sure how to interpret that. Let me skip to the bottom for a moment. Sorry who I'm skipping past, and I'll refresh just to make sure. What was the nuggets thing? Firing nuggets. Yeah, our body experience like an avatar. That's totally appropriate. I believe, of course, it can depend on nuances of what somebody means, but it's certainly appropriate. This content is amazing, truly fascinating. Well, thank you so much. Can you give an example of one of your blocks that you identified? Oh, well, the block, I was talking about a specific block, I believe, which was relating to, let me get the topic up here. You're not your mind. Right. People have a block where a separate example of a block is like when someone's been abused and they think that they should feel bad, including with John's example there, the boss is basically abusing him, right? That a reputation abuse is a property rights violation. But if you think you should feel bad about it, then that's a block, or it's something that gets mixed in that prevents you from getting over it. And not, if you think that you should feel bad, that's a block on the way to not feeling bad. And we never want to feel bad. What we want to do is figure out how to have good, right? And we don't need to feel bad on the way to that. If we do feel bad, there's a contradiction there somewhere. But the block I was referring to when I was talking about with people and their mind and control, I was talking about a block about controlling your mind, or what people are trying to at least accomplish, the good thing they're trying to accomplish out of controlling their mind. And the block there is thinking that their mind has more reasons and foundation, and the foundation is more real than it really is, when you have a feeling like that something's true or that something's false or that you should do something or that something's wrong or that you don't want to be rejected, or even just you're in bed and you don't want to get up, you feel like you don't want to get up. The block is that without realizing it, people feel like there's more reality to that feeling than there really is. I talked about arbitrary before, and that's something I probably want to develop in like its own webinar or even more than one. It's such a big deal, is realizing this idea about arbitrary versus foundations, and how, again, we attribute much more foundationalism and reality to our mind than there actually is. Much like if you put your car in drive and it kind of feels like to you like it wants to move forward, or it starts driving forward even before you put your foot on the accelerator. There's not a deeper reality to that, where your car has deep wisdom and it knows something you don't, and it really is telling you that the wisdom of the universe is telling you to move forward faster. You see what I mean? LOI is worth more than money can provide. Abundance usually starts with, well, I appreciate that. Excellent. Catherine, and I usually read these before I read them to myself. I just kind of read it out loud and hope that it turns out well. David, how do you personally categorize, for lack of a better word? And by the way, never, and no one's really doing this, but I just want you to know that I'm not thinking this. None of this is ever about like finding the exact right word or not using a taboo word, or in any way being the word police. Also, using the quote-unquote right words doesn't mean that you understand something, and so forth. So don't get too tied up with words. Get tied up more with like building what you mean properly. David, how do you personally categorize events that are bad, like a terror attack in Orlando? I'm asking with sincerity, not in challenge. Absolutely. And you guys aren't going to offend me by accident. You know, if you type in capital letters, "I hate you, I want to offend you right now," then maybe I'll take offense to the thing you type after that. But otherwise, we should be okay. Although I appreciate that that you're not asking out of some sort of challenge like that. Okay, so you'd say an event that is bad. All right, like a terror attack in Orlando. Once again, this is where property rights help us to understand. So we understand that the violation of property rights, such as with the terror attack in Orlando, we never want to do it. When we're thinking and using judgment, we always want to bring it back This is related. It's not exactly addressing what you're saying, but it's part of the answer. Anything to do with judging, what I'm going to say here is I've said it before, but maybe not in alchemy, and it's important. It might not make all the ripple effects of it aren't going to spring to mind as always, but it's ultimately very important. It's one of the, like alchemy, it's something you'll want to mix often in with what you're doing. You want to judge what you are going to do. Period. When you're judging what you are going to do. You don't need to judge other people. So let me show you a distinction there, or an example. So suppose you have John where his boss is hurting his reputation in a way that's a violation. What John wants to do is judge and strategize what he should do in that situation, not should like morally. Morally, you already know what you should do. Don't violate someone's property rights except in defense or related offense in a way that's balancing out the property rights violation from the individual that's doing it, right? So to use an extreme, if someone's attacking your child in a obviously inappropriate, ridiculous way, then of course you can violate that person's property rights, so to speak, to stop them, right, from attacking your child or you or whatever. Unless you are defending, but you wouldn't attack an innocent person that person cared about in order to get him to stop attacking your child. So the only property rights violations would be directly against the person who's performing the violation, right? You don't just say, oh, that guy is Japanese. Let me attack someone else who's Japanese to stop them. But you can attack the individual presumably. Maybe there's an even deeper morality that Jesus was referring to where you don't even want to do that. But I don't have enough understanding there. But at least by putting the boundary there, we put it somewhere reasonable. Where so we judge what we're going to do. John could judge that he might need to take out that boss in some way in order to defend himself. That could be reasonable, including something that violates that boss's property rights. Would be morally okay. It might strategically not be a good idea for other reasons. It might be against the law, or it might cause a retaliation that wouldn't be very helpful. But morally, that's all right. Then strategically, so the morality is simple and clear regarding John. You're always thinking or anyone. I'm just using that as an example. So we don't need to judge the boss. The only reason we judge the boss's property rights violation is to understand that we can defend against it now by violating that, by what would otherwise be a property rights violation towards the boss as an individual. So I judge, do I want to do that? So I'm still judging what I'm going to do, period. But part of that is the understanding of the property rights. Separate everything besides the property rights thing is just what am I going to do? So if I might be judging, do I want to proceed in business with this person? And I can be judging, and that would be separate from property rights. But maybe I'm just overall thinking how good a worker they were or how well we mesh. But I'm still judging what I'm going to do. When I'm thinking about whether I'm going to do another venture, a business venture with somebody, then I'm not judging them morally because I've delineated that. I understand that judging someone morally is purely a matter of property rights. This has nothing to do with that. Normally people have it all confused and blurry, and it feels like a moral judgment when you're thinking about somebody else, like whether you're going to work with them. And be like, oh, they did this, that's bad. They did, and I know that your question was about the terror attack. I'll get back to that. But anyway, so if I'm judging someone else, I'm judging what I'm going to do. It's very easy to meander away from doing that for a while. So try to have that be a red flag and say, wait a second, am I just judging? Did I accidentally have a goal just to believe this person violated me or to feel bad? Or to judge this person as evil? You don't know if someone's evil because you don't know how much they should have figured out by now. Okay, so with the terror attack, an event, I understand, of course, that I don't want to violate other people's property rights, so I don't want to perform a terror attack. So that takes care of me. And by spreading that idea, if everyone gets that idea more properly, then nobody will do a terror attack, and that's what we want, is to spread this idea of property rights to everybody. So that's what I'm doing about it that way. If I had a gun and the terror attack was going on, I might well have shot that person, right? Or I basically, with my current understanding, if I physically could have succeeded, I would have just shot them if they're about to gun down a whole bunch of people. Sometimes I think about difficult moral, or that's not that difficult, but more borderline moral situations, like when would I shoot someone. It's not really a priority of mine. I have other things to worry about first that are priorities. But I think about it a bit sometimes. In terms of me feeling bad, that's interesting, right? Why do people all feel bad about it? It's what I talked about earlier originally in this webinar. Well, if we don't feel bad, then there was no violation, is what a lot of people, if no one was hurt, then, and the more we're hurt, the more it makes it bad, and we want to make that event bad. Absolutely, it was a horrific horrific violation. I'm not minimizing it in any way, shape, or form. Nothing at all that I should be saying should be. But I always want to minimize bad in the future. There's no benefit to having any bad for anybody in the future. Now, I might be sensitive to the contradictions and mistakes in the minds of the people that are directly affected by this, or family members, and I wouldn't necessarily launch into a logical thing while they're grieving, right, at all. But ideally, they would understand and not need to feel more bad. They instead would want to think, well, what am I going to do to make the world perfect, just like always, right? What's the priority? There might be nothing whatsoever related to that is a priority in terms of, remember I alluded to the idea that life is a resource management game. We have limited resources. If I'm devoting resources to this terror attack that already happened, then that might not be helpful. On the other hand, if I don't, but if I knew someone personally and they needed someone to talk to feel better given the current configuration of their mind, certainly I might devote resources to that and talk to them. So those are some ideas. But if it was me personally, if I was feeling bad about it, I wouldn't think that I should feel that. I don't feel like I should feel bad about anything. I might think, what might I do? Do I want to devote resources to preventing it? Well, I'm already devoting resources the best I know how to preventing all terrorist attacks like that and all acts of aggression against people's property. I'm actively working on that, and that's why I put this stuff in there. And that's why I choose to talk about things that relate, including when the problem is that by reinforcing the idea that it's okay to violate people's property in government and in school and so forth in various ways implicitly, that is part of what leads to terrorist attacks. Not the only thing, but when we're reinforcing a deeper idea of we can violate people's property as long as we feel like it strongly enough, right? As long as I feel like a road should be built, or there's people in poverty, and that justifies me using violence, Or I think I heard Jon Stewart talk about how I know his real name is something else, but whatever. Jon Stewart of The Daily Show say, well, look, he was like debating or talking to Bill O'Reilly, and he said, well, I believe that there should be a safety net. Is that so? That's what I believe, and I believe that too. But in a sense, just like I believe everyone should have the great medical care, but I don't believe in slavery or extortion in order to accomplish it, right? Just like I believe that. Well, anyway, but stick with that. If you think that there should be a social safety net, then somehow it doesn't occur to people, go make one. If you think everyone should have health care, pay for it, or perform the actual health care on each person, maybe if you don't pay for it. And then if you can't, you say, oh, well, I can't afford to pay for it all. And if I can't, then maybe it's the case that a group of people can't. If I can't, maybe 10 people can't afford it. And if 10 people can't afford it, maybe 300 million people can't afford it. So then I might work on that and what's bottlenecking that, rather than that I need to just like use guns and violence and extortion in order to solve it. Right? That is the non sequitur. Hi, David. The block concept is something I'm really, really keen. I appreciate the additional clarification. Thank you. Sorry, I was about to read Sean's, and I will, but I'll just read Catherine's response. I appreciate the additional clarification. Thank you. I understand with more clarity that if more and more people begin to deepen their understanding of property rights, it truly does begin to heal or take care of that. But you're right. It's immensely sad and hard for me to grasp, to be honest. I can't change that someone else makes poor or even horrible choices. but I can change my response and the actions I take as a result. You can change your response, you can change your actions, and what you want to do is, again, we're always looking to see what's the block, what's the contradiction, what's the most effective, and really, again, looking at something like this as a resource management issue can help, because we have when you understand you have limited resources in life, then and as time goes on, if time keeps going on, then it's unlimited in that sense, that there's always more resources as more time goes by. But in any given moment or day, there's a limited amount of resources, and then it's a question of, well, where's the best use of my resources? And it might be helping people that were affected by this. It might be doing something that would prevent this in the future for real, like really prevent it, and prevent it in a way that doesn't cause other problems or even worse problems, right? Or it may be just doing something totally different and focusing on that. So you treat it as a resource management problem. None of this is cold. I'm the opposite of like cold-hearted or cold, whatever, blooded with these things, or cold logic or unemotional. I base everything foundationally on the idea of goodness and badness in our experience. It's all about the conscious experience of goodness and eliminating badness. So it's literally the very opposite of cold logic. It's all based in feelings and having better value of your experience, or however you want to put, more goodness and less badness. That's the very foundation of everything I do. So I care very much. I'm doing this right now because I want you to have more goodness and less badness. Learning these distinctions is also critical because of the way these events are spun for agendas, right? Totally, which involves, right, more violation, right? Certainly we'd be suspicious when things involve more money, more control, less ability for people to fight back against oppressors and that sort of thing, right? Thank you. That was very helpful. I know you care very much. Of course. Yeah, I wouldn't question that. I don't mean, of course, I care, but I certainly wouldn't doubt that you think that I care at this point. That is clear and very appreciated. Great. Okay, Sean. Hi, David. The block concept is something that I am really, really keen on breaking down and working through so my mind can learn what's truly possible. Great aspiration, Sean. Are we going to dive deeper into this so I can learn your techniques, please? Thanks. Oh, yeah. I mean, in a sense, alchemy is so much about blocks. Remember originally when I talked about the idea of alchemy as an illustration, or as the reason I called it this, is we're learning to have the right building blocks and mix them together to get what we want. But we're also, alchemy is about dissolving, right? If you understand the ingredients to something, you can dissolve, in this case, blocks, right? So everything that I said in my monologue was, in essence, towards dissolving blocks, right? If you look at that very first slide, this whole thing is I was trying to give you an indication of how various blocks or goals for avoidance get triggered, or what amounts to a block, which is we end up putting a lot of resources into feeling hurt and wallowing in feeling hurt just so we can make the violation more real, because then we feel like that makes it more likely that someone will stop doing it, which makes, in a twisted way, it makes sense, but it only makes sense based on the twisted logic, where it went wrong. But it makes sense, right? If I wallow in being hurt and I communicate that to myself and other people, now it makes the violation more visible, and maybe it makes someone see how I'm hurt, and maybe they stop doing it. But there's but that all is unnecessary if we do it all differently and understand the world in terms of property rights violations. Love, by the way, is the other side of the coin, right? Life isn't just about not violating people's property rights, or I wouldn't be doing this, right? Love is about caring for other people and doing things to help them, but of course that's a different track, right? Love is on a different track. Love has nothing to do with when we violate someone else, whatever, or defend and so forth. But all of morality can basically be combined with property rights and then love. Those two things kind of encompass both aspects of it, as far as I know right now. And if someone showed me, and I'm always looking to understand that better, if I show that I was missing something, if I see that, or if someone else shows me, then I'll correct myself. What was I saying? Oh, this whole thing becomes unnecessary if we can see things more properly. Then we don't need to wallow in pain in order to get people to stop doing an even worse violation to us. If we spread the right understanding, where with property rights, a violation is a violation regardless of whether it makes me miserable or not. Thanks, another great way to value reviews, absolutely. And I'm all about the block dissolving, and I'll constantly be delving into things that help us dissolve blocks. And I'm with you. I'm so into that, and what am I missing, and what's the block? LOI is worth more than money can provide. Thank you. I already read that one. Worth reading again. Abundance usually starts with wealth, correct? Wealth and basically relationships, right? Personal relationships. And personal relationships often lead to wealth. So it all comes together. I try to avoid judging someone by their wealth too much, right? Of course, to some degree, you have to think, all right, am I going to listen to this guy talking about finances if he has no money? We kind of have to walk a line when we're advertising things, including like Alchemy. We need to indicate that I have financial success without trying to harp on it. Obviously, there's always somebody richer. It doesn't mean that they're more right than somebody else just because they have more money. Why do you think our brains are so poor at doing things? Why do we have so many difficulties in thinking clearly and logically? How can you argue that we are not our brains when even slight changes to our brains can cause enormous changes in how we think, what we believe, and how we behave? Okay, good question. Compound question there. Okay. In this case, good question means I know the answer, as opposed to the good question where I don't know the answer. All right. We don't think clearly and logically. Our brain does all of our thinking. How can we argue that we're not our brains when even slight changes to our brains can cause enormous changes to how we think? Your brain is actually that which thinks. Thinking is in service to goals. Your brain thinks and learns and memorizes and so forth and believes based on trying to achieve goals. Goals give meaning to everything else that your brain is doing. So you actually aren't that which thinks, your brain does. That's the crazy thing. And that's what I mean by what I'm teaching you is different than even if once in a while there are some philosophies or gurus that can say you're not your mind or you're not your brain. But then they end up saying that you're something else that amounts to your mind, or amounts to part of your mind or one function of your mind. You don't even think. You're not something that thinks. You're aware. And you can do something that I call seeking understanding, which we can seek to understand that, for sure, better and better. When I say things like you are that which is conscious of your consciousness field, the being that's, our brain immediately wants to triangulate. It wants to know more and more. It wants to have a bunch of positive associations. When I say positive, I don't mean positive like positive thinking. I mean positive like it doesn't want to just say like what you aren't. It wants to be like you are this, you are that. What are you? Your brain wants that. That's how your brain functions. As you get to know that your brain functions that way, you don't get so wrapped into it. You realize that that's an example of what I mean by there isn't a foundation or reality to your brain telling you that you want to know what something is by making these positive identifications of qualities about you yourself. Your brain's going to try to attach all these qualities to you. Sorry, I just had the thought real quick of, in case anyone, probably no one's trying to get into the group right now, but just in case. These might be from other places, but just in case, I'll approve people here. The power of being an administrator. Okay, back to the thread. So awareness does not involve intelligence. Okay. The reason why we're aware of what we're aware of involves our brain and our mind. Our brain and our mind, I'll just say our mind is very tied in to you. Your mind is very tied into you in a number of ways. What you do or don't do in terms of seeking understanding will end up leading will cause a cascade of reasons that will affect your mind and lead it to have better ideas and dissolve wrong ideas. The current state of the good ideas and bad ideas in your mind is going to affect your experience, including how you feel and how much goodness and badness you experience right now. Again, you lead that state to be increased, the amount of goodness versus badness and so forth, and dissolving the badness. You lead that to be increased by seeking understanding. I can't explain to you seeking understanding perfectly within the wrong worldview. The wrong worldview, you can't explain anything very well because it's an incorrect foundation for the world. But I can explain seeking understanding in terms of the correct worldview a bit. The correct worldview, again, is based on your consciousness field. You experience goodness and badness, more or less goodness and more or less badness, maybe zero badness, in your conscious experience, your consciousness field. What you don't want to do is experience badness or have the sense that someone else is experiencing badness and say that's fine, that's optimal, I'm not curious. Your brain will be like, nothing to see here, right? Quick government example, if there's a solution to something, poverty or roads, and it involves extorting other people, and clearly some people feel bad from that, and you're like, well, that's fine, we need that, then you're not seeking understanding. If there's someone that's suffering, now some things might not be a priority, that's different, right? You can't think of everything at once and solve every problem simultaneously. But what you basically never want to do is look at something that contains bad for someone else and feel like you're ultimately satisfied with that. And then once you realize you're not ultimately satisfied with any badness, then it comes down to resource management, and you think, well, what do I work on first? Where do I seek understanding on first to dissolve badness or increase goodness? And it turns out that the answer to the priority is, well, first you need to have your stable financial base, presumably, right? But then separate from that, and that may or may not need to be the case, but let's say that there's a certain amount of just basic stability. But past basic stability, then you pretty much want to be here with me or doing the same type of thing as me on your own. But these are the topics, right? Mind, goals, the God, what's the foundation for things. Everything we're talking about in alchemy is where you're going to get your most bang for your buck, for starters. Once you have this whole foundation, then you can get to the more mundane stuff. There's a pretty cool Zen statement that basically ends up being right, which is like, before enlightenment, chopping wood, gathering sticks, chopping wood, or something like gathering logs, chopping wood. And then before enlightenment, gathering logs, chopping wood, or something like that. And then after enlightenment, gathering logs, chopping wood, right? So first you have your kind of mundane tending to your life. Then you want to figure out all this foundational stuff. And then the more surface level stuff becomes important again in a way of saying, because you're still building stuff and interact with people, go to the movies, having fun, playing games on your computer, whatever it might be, as well. But in between those two things, you want to get these ideas figured out. I basically spent my 20s, chronologically, like during my years when I was 20, particularly figuring this stuff out. And that once I figured it out, then I was able to, next thing I did was get my relationship straight with my wife-to-be, or find her and then get that. But I knew how to, I had a good sense of how to make it work, and then I worked on business after that. And it all just worked boom, boom, boom really well because I had the framework. Then mostly what I've worked on since then, I've developed understanding that's been very helpful for me since then, but especially bridging it to other people is what I work on now. So intelligence is more a quality of your brain, actually, not you. You are conscious and you get the consequences of your brain, but you are able to affect the state of your brain by seeking understanding, is the best I understand it right now. And we'll keep looking at that from different angles as we've continued to do in this webinar. And always I'm talking about this stuff. I'm always talking about stuff that is related to these deepest ideas, basically, including building off of it. We'll get to more quote-unquote mundane stuff, like working on building your offer and your marketing plan for your offer, whatever that might be in life. You'll want that, right? But that'll serve to also as fodder for for taking advantage of these ideas. So we'll be understanding the deeper ideas by applying them to that once we're ready to get there. And then we'll take a look at relationships more specifically and kind of a little bit more mundane level. But again, it'll be based on and helping us investigate applications of our foundation as we do that. The voice in your head is you. If the voice in your head is you, who's the one listening to it? Beautiful. Amen. There you go. You're the one listening to it. You're not the voice in your head. But your brain is related to it, your mind. And other things could be affecting that too. God could be influencing it directly, but even then, it would still be filtered through your head. It's useful to know that even if God wanted to speak to you directly, God couldn't, in essence, because the word would still be interpreted through your brain and its experience. So keep that in mind, that God may well speak to you, but you still need to think it through and understand, and it would still be twisted by your mind. So you need to really check things over and make sure. Is Alchemy going to be a public launch of Law of Implication or still kept within the realm of OMG? Well, people will be listening to this on the replay at some point, but Alchemy is going to be open to the public, so to speak. It'll be a separate purchase that they can get. It's also included, however, within Director's Cut. Anyone that has live webinars that they're paying for that, Alchemy is included. Otherwise, it's a separate purchase. And we'll be announcing it more specifically starting Wednesday, 2 days from now. Use Alchemy to break down the block by identifying the parts then. Yeah, depending on how you interpret that, but I think you had I presume you have the right meaning there. There's all sorts of blocks, right? There's all sorts of contradictions and blocks that we want to get through in our current system. Or we could think of it like we want to build, kind of how it works is you have your current model for the world. You're going to keep using that model because otherwise you're just going to stare at the wall while otherwise, right? You're not going to do that. You still are going to, practically speaking, use your model. Separately together, ideally, we're going to build a model like in parallel, like I talked about on the side. However, even as you start to build that model, you can start to make adjustments to your existing model. Perhaps at some point your model will be so complete that your new one, that you can use it instead. At first, you're going to be kind of have one foot in, one in the other, practically speaking. And I have to use the word you to refer to like you as a conscious being mixed, smushed together conceptually with your mind because we're so used to talking that way. I could try to have a more distinct vocabulary for it. And I kind of, what I do is I sometimes am talking about the topic of you and your mind in a way that I will distinguish. And I'll consider maybe having some kind of vocabulary. The trouble is I don't want to get into some kind of weird word police thing. And it can just be hard to follow what I'm saying if I don't talk to you kind of using some kind of normal words at some point that, like we have to kind of bridge things. And while we're in this transitional phase, then it's just transitional. There's just, to repeat myself, a transitional nature to it that's unavoidable when I use the word you. But basically, yeah, you're going to be building a parallel model of how the world really works that's proper and foundational. And as it's being built, you'll still be kind of functioning out of your old model, but you'll also find opportunities to make adjustments and remove blocks within your old model and have that be more effective. And then, I don't know, they kind of, I'll have to think for how it works for me, but they kind of merge together. Or I'm still in transition myself, we could say. But at this point, I've developed so much understanding that at this point it's so beneficial for you to get what I've gotten that even if I don't have everything straight, it's time for us to do this together. And then I can catch you up at least on where I'm at, right? It would be like if I was working on I don't know, just to be cliche, like a cure for cancer. If I had cured a number of different cancers, but not every single one, and then if also what I was working on was involved medical, like a way of doing medicine and science that other people didn't know about, that if I shared it, then other people could be doing it too, and then we can catch up to each other and then move from there, and then maybe other people would discover some other things that I wouldn't have discovered on my own, and plus then I could take more of a break and so forth. My car doesn't have wisdom. My car doesn't want to go forward. My car is not in charge of driving me to the next place. Phew, thank goodness. That's funny. But it's funny how we can anthropomorphize, right? We can kind of feel like that is the case once in a while, especially if it's acting up. That's when people feel like it has a mind of its own, we might say, right? The way that you operate from law of implication while explaining it and demonstrate it repeatedly from how OMG is run to how you respond to questions gives so much validity to it. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I can't disagree. I think that at this point, I do understand enough and get so much benefit from it that's obvious that I think it's visible to a decent degree at this point. Is seeing this consistency a form of triangulation, or is it something more foundational? I don't know. One aspect of it is kind of triangulation, but there's nothing wrong, by the way, with one thing you want to keep reminding yourself of. There's nothing wrong with how your brain functions, and there's nothing wrong with working with it the way it functions. As a matter of fact, it's right to understand how your brain functions just great. Just like your car isn't designed wrong because it'll have inertia. The opposite of inertia would be what? Your mind wouldn't work at all. It would just sit there absolutely inert, right? So something has to be going on by default. Your brain functions a certain way by default. And what we want to do is appreciate how we work with our brain. To do that, we need to differentiate ourselves from our brain. When we conflate ourselves and confuse ourselves with our mind. Oh, I was saying before I never finished that thought. I was on a slide. I was telling the end of my monologue, so to speak. And the funny thing is, it's like your brain thinks it's kind of conscious because it thinks it's you, and you think you're your brain. Your brain thinks in the way that it does. You think in the way you do. But your brain, in your brain's way, thinks it's conscious in its own way. It doesn't think it's really conscious because it has no conception of consciousness because it's not conscious. That sort of statement I just made is the sort of thing you want to get used to thinking. All right? But your brain has this kind of twisted idea of conscious, and it thinks it is. And you identify with your brain, and so you basically think and act, or your brain thinks and acts, but you approve of thinking and acting or rubber stamp ideas based on you not being conscious. So you have a conception of yourself that's partially not conscious or functionally not conscious in many ways. And your brain has this idea that it is conscious because you both think you're each other in a sense. And that's kind of funny once you see it that way. And then when it also shows, you'll see how it causes so many inefficiencies and mistakes. As you tease it apart and start to reason from the idea that you're distinct, then again, you'll just keep coming up with cool stuff. And I'm not going to keep this a secret. I'll develop it with you. As I like to say, I've been talking the whole time, right? So I'm not holding back. I just can't say everything at once. So all this is being developed. That's why otherwise I'd be intimidated by the idea of speaking twice a week, right, for several months. It ends up being a lot, right, if you think about it. I don't have like all the topics planned. I have the topics planned out in general, but I don't have them like a spreadsheet where I'm like, all right, on June 14th or on August 17th, I'm gonna say this topic or something, like a syllabus like that. I just know that the things that I want to get you to, and I'm just working at doing that together, kind of like as if we're sitting around at OMG Live in kind of a semicircle and we're talking. Plus, I do a hell of a lot of preparation. So to whatever degree I'm disorganized, then it's not for lack of putting in time. It's just my inherited competence that I can't overcome. Before I saw, oh, awesome. Yeah, Kay knows this stuff. Before I sought enlightenment, the mountains were mountains, the rivers were rivers. While I sought enlightenment, the mountains were not mountains, and this is great. There's definitely some great stuff in both Buddhism and Taoism. I'm a Christian, as I understand that Jesus was God. But yeah, this is terrific. Before I sought enlightenment, the mountains were mountains and the rivers were rivers. While I sought enlightenment, the mountains were not mountains and the rivers were not rivers. After I attained enlightenment, the mountains were mountains and the rivers were rivers. That's terrific, and that that can be interpreted to be true or to not be true. But there's a kind of a good, a reasonable way to look at this where it's very true and it mirrors my understanding and experience. It's great. I am starting to see how your brain goes places and then gets stuck there. Yep. Such as when one thought triggers a related rumination. Sometime through the rumination, when you're just kind of thinking how someone's a jerk, or thinking how you wish something didn't happen, or why did you do this silly thing the other day, right? That kind of thing. Sorry, that was an interlude. Sometime through the rumination, my hero writes, I become aware that my mind went there, and it's like the cleaning robot hitting the wall, right? That cleaning robot that looks kind of like a bathroom scale, but it's a vacuum robot that I talked about once. However, I am wondering, is there a way for us to increase intelligence, given, as you said, intelligence is your brain? Well, what I like to think of, absolutely, what I think of in terms of functional intelligence, effective intelligence. There's different kind of ways that people modify the word intelligence, but I think in terms of effective intelligence, this is fairly good. I don't really like definitions, but these are more like constructed anyway. But I like to think of intelligence as your brain, of course. Whenever I'm talking about something achieving goals, it means the brain part of things, or your mind. There's the ability to achieve goals that are currently configured in it, and then there's the ability to figure out the right goals, we could say. Well, that's kind of an old distinction I had, which the ability to figure out the right goals would be more like wisdom, what we might think of, and then intelligence is more like the mind's ability to achieve the goals that it currently has. But absolutely, your effective intelligence is going to skyrocket, for sure, with alchemy. Oh my goodness, you'll get way effectively smarter by us. You'll also get effectively smarter by working through scenarios in your mind. You'll get better at communicating back and forth with your mind and also leading it through thinking properly, the more you picture scenarios kind of vividly. And there's a book called The Einstein Factor that's quite good, and it has a technique called image streaming that involves looking at your pictures in your head, even if how vague they are, and then describing them out loud, even into a tape recorder. And that will also help because it helps your ability to work through scenarios, to think in scenarios, and go from there. The Einstein Factor. Should we be able to pick up the mind? This is Mahir. I didn't let him finish. I didn't read everything he wrote. I stopped at the. Is there a way to increase intelligence? Given, as you said, intelligence is your brain and not you, and as such, we should be able to pick up the mind like the cleaning robot from stupid thinking. Yeah, actually, that's a reasonable metaphor. Any metaphor is not, of course, is going to have things that are metaphorical, and if you get too wrapped up in a metaphor, there can be things that can go off. But thinking of like picking up the cleaning robot and getting it in the right, putting it in the place that's more useful rather than having it stuck in a corner or something, is a good way of thinking like the goalscape. That can be one way of looking at the benefit of thinking about your goals from pretty consistently, or whenever there's kind of like a red flag. It's kind of like saying, well, if someone says, well, how often do you think about the goalscape rather than like the landscape? And that would be kind of like saying, how often do you pay attention to what you're doing kind of consciously when you're driving? I don't do it like once an hour. I do it like when necessary, right? If there's a car close to me or whatever, little red flags and so forth. Megan wrote, thank you, David. Very grateful for the answers and direction to not let frustration cause future blocks. We'll work on being more aware and more seek to understand. Awesome, Megan. Absolutely. And, again, we'll just keep going. Presumably, and for a lot of you that are into this, you'll listen to the replay of this at least once, and then we'll just keep going with this, right? There's just more to explain and more angles to look at and more and more. So do you think, no, see, this is what you'll learn, and I'm always just so patient with this, with myself and with everyone. As a matter of fact, I'd look kind of silly if everyone got this, like this webinar, then I don't know what I'd do in the other webinars. But But literally, you don't think. You don't think outside your brain. And by realizing that you can't think, see, to think you have to process, and to process you're like something that changes and does all this stuff. I realized that whoever we are, it wasn't the thing that thinks and so forth. Once I realized that, then it forced me to figure out what is it that I do as a conscious being. Where is my lever for power? And I alluded to this, or mentioned this specifically last webinar too. That's one of the real central questions. What is it that you do? And what you want to do is kind of eliminate all the things that involve processing and multiple decisions. See, if you do anything that involves deciding between a lot of options, then that leads to a regress in that, well, then you would need a method to decide. So you need to get to something binary and not also like whimsical that you would do. And that's why I narrowed it down to seeking understanding. And I realize that's just words, but something I'm always trying to develop with you better. And there'll be times when I more try to deal with that more directly. Right now, I'm filling in stuff around. Oh, and this is direct, because how do we figure out the answer to any question? Right? We build around the context, and that's what I'm doing now. Everything I'm talking about is context that's related to the answers that we all want. But what do we always feel like? We still have the old model where we keep wanting to ask, well, what's the final answer? I literally can't even give it to you. The only way I can give it to you is by building in the context like we're doing. Mm-hmm. Random question, feel free to ignore. What are your views on either Ayn Rand or Eckhart Tolle? Seems like some of their views run somewhat parallel to some of yours. Yeah, they do run parallel at times. We do differ here and there, but I don't have a great list of it. And then ultimately, they just didn't realize the stuff that we're talking about here. All the stuff about building off of consciousness field. What some other people have tried to do is build off of logic, like Ayn Rand tried to build off of the identity principle, A equals A. You can't, logic, weirdly enough, or maybe surprisingly enough, is actually not foundational. Several philosophers have tried to make it foundational. It's really close to foundational, but it's not foundational. I thought it was foundational at first, and then I would frustrate myself trying to talk to people until I figured out the proper foundation, which lies in your consciousness field. And then you're thinking, and you construct words, you construct the meaning of words or definitions from words out of starting from your consciousness field and distinctions there. And then logic involves not equivocating, not switching the meanings that you've constructed without realizing it, or on purpose by realizing it, one way or the other. Logic is about not switching the meanings of your words. But the meanings of your words are based in constructing from your consciousness field. And so logic is not foundational. But again, what logic means, which is constructed now, is the idea of not changing the meanings of your words. Logic is necessary, but not foundational. Your brain is also necessary for the process. You are always trying to, see, you're trying to lead your brain, but your brain, it's a weird thing. It's very different, but it's not weird. It's weird in a fun way of speaking. And what I was going to say is you actually lead your brain around, right? It's a little bit like you tend to goals, or your brain is trying to achieve goals, and you are leading those goals to be adjusted in the most adaptive and effective and good, in the sense that it leads to good fashion all the time. So you're seeking to understand what goals you want your mind to be working on now, as opposed to 2 minutes ago or last year or 40 years ago. That's another way of understanding yourself versus your brain. But I was saying something. You lead your brain around, so to speak, with goal. Like you seek, that leads goals to be adjusted, and that leads to another cascade of your brain thinking and what its beliefs and models and actions that it and your body take. Or you could say it leads your mind to have different beliefs, and then have your body do different actions. It's all like a cascade that happens. I feel like I had another thought, but that I might have flown out of my mind. Hi, yeah, you missed a good one, but they're all good ones, and we'll always have the replay. Oh, I was saying logic is not foundational, but it's and then again I was mentioning how, but necessary. But just like your brain is necessary, it's all in your mind. It's all part of what we're working with. But we just want to differentiate from it, and it's not built wrong. We just need to work with it. It was built to work with you consciously, and because people are satisfied with some bad, then that's lacking faith, and then people don't work with their brains enough consciously. And so we want to work with our brains as was always intended. Our brains are designed perfectly to work with us consciously. And it's the only way they could have been designed, basically, as far as I can tell. How closely do the principles of Think and Grow Rich follow law of implication? The principles in Think and Grow Rich are mostly correct, but they're based on a process of observation. They're also based on a process of observation that's a little bit like Frogger, okay, where so they could be correct, but they could be leaving out some things. So suppose a bunch of frogs hop across the street, right, like a multi-lane highway, and then you interview the frogs that made it. How'd they do it? Well, what are they going to tell you? Oh, I persevered, I believed, I didn't get it, I wasn't afraid, I didn't get intimidated, I had a wife that encouraged me, and I didn't get distracted by looking at other cute female frogs on the way because some did that and then they got run over, right? I transmuted my sexual drive into focus to my career, all the things, right, and Think and Grow Rich. I had a definite purpose, right, and so forth. But a lot of other frogs might have done the same thing and still gotten squashed. And, and Napoleon Hill himself, as far as I understand, really had didn't do that great financially. And he was always trying to find that final principle, or that deeper principle. So he basically used an interview format, totally valid form of science. You do that to narrow things down in the gray areas and where you can't know. Law of implication is about working in the black and white areas first, and then it turns out you never need to leave those areas. That your brain and automatically the gray areas will take care of themselves. Your brain and mind, you're always going to operate with regard to what you can't know. You're always going to just be doing your mind and brain is going to do its best. Your mind, your brain is built to function, to optimize as best it can, based on not being able to know anything for sure, based on everything being gray. This is another great thought that is profound that I was always going to get to, but I'm mentioning it now just because it naturally came out of me talking about this answer here. And all these things will get developed and from different angles and are part of the whole context that we're building in. But your brain, again, is designed perfectly for operating the best it can, given that it doesn't know for sure anything. All right? What you want to do is start to work consciously and lead it, delineate it, put boundaries in as many places that are black and white and understandable as possible. It turns out you can build an incredible amount once you start doing that. But people never realize that. They identify with their brains. Their brains are their whole mental model of life is based on the idea that everything's ultimately a gray area, and let's optimize dealing with gray areas. Instead, law of implication says, focus on what you can know and build from there. And it turns out that you can just keep going and going and going, and things just get better and better and better when you do that. Neil Gregory asks, could you answer my previous question, please, David? If your brain doesn't have a concept of consciousness, as you said earlier, where does that concept come from and how could we be discussing it? I'm seeking understanding here, not trying to be troublesome. Absolutely. And I'll always assume people are trying to seek understanding the best they can. We can have a concept of consciousness by thinking of it like the metaphor I've used, where it's like your brain deals with dried milk and then you add the liquid in, but you have to keep adding the liquid in each time. So you do the law of implication. You again, your brain is going to do what it's going to do already based on its current stuff in the gray areas. When you start out, everything's a gray area, and your brain is doing the best it's learned to operate in life that way. When you interact consciously with your brain, or to the extent that you do, or think of it like a small window into a small part of your brain, metaphorically speaking. Okay, I'm just being metaphorical. But suppose you have a small window into part of your brain, or part of the model that your brain and you communicate between, right? You and your brain communicate actually via scenarios, via the experience that you kind of feel of like walking around in the world and thinking about the world based on that. Anyhow, so imagine you have a small window into part of your brain at any one time. As you seek understanding, you're adding the consciousness in to that small window, that seeking, and you are correcting a little bit at a time. It's like you're shining a light, and a little bit more gets corrected, and a little bit more gets corrected, and it snowballs. And I've been doing that for a couple decades, and I now make it easier for you by having a reasonable amount of triangulated proof. And plus, then you start listening, and you're like, wow. And then, as you start to listen, you start to experience it directly, where now it's not just based on how much is in my bank account or whatever, or how nifty OMG is and how nice that is and how many people are succeeding with it, but you're feeling it. You're getting a glimpse, and you're experiencing it. You're building things you can know for sure, and it's awesome, right? So that's how it goes. Or at least that's more of my answer, and ultimately I'm always addressing this idea of brain, consciousness, you. That's kind of at the root of everything we're talking about. I'm always elucidating that more from different contexts, different angles. But it's an irony. Your brain can't have a concept of consciousness. There wasn't any way for God to give your brain a concept of consciousness. In order for your brain or anything to have a concept of consciousness, it has to be conscious itself. So God would have had to create a whole separate person that is your brain, and it's not possible. And then the minute that person changed, that person wouldn't be that person anymore. So it's logically impossible for God to have done it differently than God did, or for things to be different than they are. You don't actually have to know that God exists to follow that. Like, you could just reduce it to things have to be the way that they are. Your brain can't be conscious, or else there have to be a whole separate conscious being there with your brain. You wouldn't want that, and it wouldn't be possible anyway. It would be a contradiction in terms. What would be the best way to evolve? Wow, we've gone 3 hours again. This is crazy. I guess we'll have to cut it off here and then continue next session. But this is good. Once I run out of things to say, if that ever happens in a few months, then I can come back to some questions. But what would be the best way to evolve from affirmations? Building the ability to think in scenarios, and then running scenarios to motivate you away from pain or towards pleasure. Not sure. The best way to evolve from affirmations. I don't not do affirmations. If you watch the end of my fear video, I talk about when your brain's irrational and the magic blanket technique. And affirmations are cool as kind of an in the gray area. When you know you don't know one way or the other, you might as well affirm the way you want it to be, right? Like, and But let me treat it separately from the affirmation question. Building the ability to think in scenarios, which you want to do for sure. You want to think in scenarios, and I'll develop the idea of thinking in scenarios as well in Alchemy, some more. And then running scenarios to motivate you away from pain or towards pleasure. I wouldn't necessarily phrase it that way in terms of away from pain or towards pleasure. I would run a scenario in order to understand or to communicate with my brain. Two ways, two scenarios. One is to figure out what's correct by saying, wait a second, I want to understand that better. And so you start to add and subtract things from the scenario, right? You run it forwards, backwards. You say, what if I add this in there? What if I do that? What if I buy this product? And then what would I do after? What would I do next? How would I allocate my resources? So you can increase your understanding there. If you feel like you're stuck with something with pain or motivation, then you can run the scenario through to see how to get to where you want and to see that there's no point in being stuck. I'm a little bit winding down here, so I don't know how if I'm addressing this as well as I might, but that starts to give an idea. But this is great. This question's pretty cool. I'll presumably come back to these topics here with affirmations and running scenarios and what to do with it. Probably just pretty much wind down here for this one. We always have to stop these before I can get to everything. And I know I skipped over a number of earlier questions too. But as I always say, I've been talking, so I've been saying something at least, and I'll keep going. Oh man, this is a great question by Shima. I hate to not address this. Oh, about passion, right? Shima has a question about passion. I've heard experts say if you're not passionate about your business, then you will fail with your business. Could you comment? I'm living proof. I mean, I wouldn't say that I was passionate about business. I mainly, and the thing that I am passionate about, when I'm passionate about something, I like to build my way out of having to do it for money, like I'm doing now. Ideally, for sure, you'd be passionate about your business. Yeah, I talked about it in MAM, in my course about information products, Mike, for example. I don't think I talked about this in Alchemy, but at least as your stable base, you need to do whatever it takes to presumably to have a stable base of finances, right? Unless you know of some way to get by without that. And it's a stable base. It might be very, very, very little money. If you can live with your parents and have other people support you and do whatever, as long as it's voluntary, then you might need an extraordinary little bit of money for have your stable base. Whatever makes it so you don't need money in a way where you have to make it a priority. Once you're past that, then we're just kind of realistically, you have to make money a priority. And you can try to, again, shave that down to as little as possible. Then you have to do whatever it takes for that. After that, if you can merge your passion in order to make your life more comfortable. But one thing I recommend is that you try to help other people solve their problems as your first focus. And I'll deal with this also in your offer and so forth. But just as a quick answer, we'll get to that. But I would basically disagree specifically with that advice about that you need to be passionate. And I think that sells well. I don't want to be like overtly critical about people might be saying it, but if you have to do what it takes, then you have to do what it takes is kind of what I would say for now. And that's what I've done, is do what it takes. And if you don't want to do it, then build your way out of it, you know. All right, guys. Well, thank you. I'll cut it off here for real. And another terrific. I'm not really speaking of myself, but you guys once again we're just awesome with your questions and your feedback and everything. And attendance was actually terrific on here too. Once again, about a couple hundred people every time, close to it. Curious to learn more about the concept of mixing. Great. Great. In one sense, everything I'm talking about involves that, but I'll try to also deal with it more specifically. I also like the idea of creating as many boundaries as possible in black or white zones to gain clarity. Yep, exactly right. Yeah, boundaries are terrific when they're real, and they often open you up. It's not like they keep stuff out. Of course, keeping bad out is nice, but they often open things up, right? Like the boundary about morality with property rights actually gets rid of so much clutter with thinking this is bad and that's bad. Thank you, David. This has been amazing. Thank you very much. You're very welcome, everyone. Oh, thank you, John. That's awesome. A total joy. It was a joy for me as well. When I start out, I'm not sure how it'll go, but then something always happens, right?